The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete walkways of Naval Training Center Point Loma as Sarah Martinez stepped off the shuttle bus, a worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. At 27, she looked younger. Her petite 5'4" frame and delicate features often led people to mistake her for a college student rather than a military professional. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket that did nothing to suggest the person beneath. The air carried the familiar scent of salt water mixed with diesel fuel and fresh paint, the distinctive smell of every naval installation she'd ever visited. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic cadence of a drill instructor calling out commands, punctuated by the synchronized thunder of boots hitting pavement. It was a sound that usually brought her comfort, a reminder of shared purpose and collective discipline. Today, though, it only reminded her how carefully she'd have to tread. Sarah paused at the main gate, fishing her newly issued identification card from her pocket. The guard, a young petty officer 3rd class, who couldn't have been more than 20, barely glanced at it before waving her through. She noticed his eyes flick over her with the briefest hint of curiosity, then dismiss her entirely as he turned his attention back to his phone. Just another face in the constant flow of personnel rotating through the facility. Good, she thought. Invisible is exactly what I need to be. Her orders had been explicit and came from the highest levels of Naval Special Warfare Command. Conduct an undercover evaluation of training protocols, security procedures, and facility readiness. Her official cover story listed her as Petty Officer 2nd Class Sarah Martinez, Communications Specialist, recently transferred from a desk job at Naval Station Norfolk. The reality was considerably more complex. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories, so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Sarah made her way toward the administration building, her eyes automatically scanning the environment with the trained awareness that came from years of operating in hostile territories. She noted the placement of security cameras, the angles of approach to various buildings, the locations where sightlines were blocked by structures or vegetation. Old habits died hard, and in her line of work, situational awareness wasn't just a skill, it was survival. The base itself was typical of mid-sized naval training facilities. Functional architecture from the 1960s, mixed with newer construction, everything painted in variations of military gray and beige. Palm trees lined some of the walkways, their fronds rustling in the ocean breeze, providing the only real aesthetic relief from the utilitarian landscape. Through gaps between buildings, she could see glimpses of the Pacific Ocean, its surface glittering in the afternoon light. As she walked, Sarah caught fragments of conversations from passing personnel, 2 female sailors discussing their upcoming leave, a group of male petty officers debating the merits of different duty stations, an instructor complaining about paperwork to a colleague. Normal military life, the daily routine that formed the backbone of naval operations. She'd spent so much time in the shadows, conducting operations that would never appear in any official record, that these mundane interactions felt almost surreal. At the administration building, she checked in with the duty officer, a tired-looking lieutenant commander who processed her paperwork with efficient disinterest. He assigned her to Building 7, berthing area for transient communications personnel, and provided her with a facility map and meal card. The entire interaction took less than 10 minutes. No questions about her background, no curiosity about her previous assignments, no indication that she was anything other than another technician passing through. Her quarters turned out to be a small room in a 4-person suite, standard military issue, metal frame bed, with precisely made corners, small desk and chair, wall locker, and shared bathroom facilities. 2 of her suite mates were apparently deployed. The third, based on the personal items Sarah could see through the partially open door, was an aviation electronics technician who liked country music and had family in Texas. Sarah unpacked methodically, placing her carefully curated belongings in deliberate positions. A few paperback novels, mystery thrillers, nothing too intellectual. Some civilian clothes appropriate for a junior enlisted communications specialist, standard toiletries. A framed photo of an older woman she'd been told was supposed to be her aunt in California, though the woman was actually a retired Navy intelligence officer who'd helped construct her cover identity. Everything designed to suggest an ordinary background, simple tastes, no secrets to hide. But as she arranged her belongings, Sarah was acutely aware of what she wasn't unpacking. The items that stayed carefully concealed at the bottom of her duffel, wrapped in innocuous clothing, the encrypted communication device that would allow secure contact with her handlers, the small notebook where she'd record her observations, written in a personal shorthand that would be meaningless to anyone else. And, secured in a hidden pocket sewn into the bag's lining, her real military ID, the one that identified her as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. She allowed herself a moment to touch the concealed pocket, feeling the outline of the ID card through the fabric. It had been 3 weeks since she'd been able to acknowledge her real rank, her real identity. 3 weeks of playing a role, of deliberately underperforming, of biting back responses when she heard procedures being done incorrectly or security protocols being violated. The mission planners had estimated she'd need 4 to 6 weeks to complete her evaluation without drawing suspicion. She was supposed to be invisible, unmemorable, just another technician doing routine maintenance work. What the planners hadn't fully appreciated was how difficult it would be for someone with her training to convincingly perform at a junior enlisted level. Every instinct she'd honed through years of the most demanding military training in the world screamed at her to excel, to demonstrate competence, to take charge when she saw problems that needed solving. Suppressing those instincts felt like trying to write with her non-dominant hand, technically possible, but requiring constant conscious effort. Sarah finished unpacking and checked her watch. 1,630 hours. The evening meal service would begin at 1,700. She had time to walk the facility, start building her mental map of the base layout, and begin her initial observations. She changed into her working uniform, the blue Navy working uniform Type 3, that had replaced the old blue camouflage pattern, and headed out. The base was transitioning from day operations to evening routine. Personnel moved between buildings with the purposeful efficiency of people finishing their assigned tasks before Liberty Call. Sarah walked slowly, appearing casual while actually conducting a detailed reconnaissance. She noted which buildings had keycard access, which relied on simple locks, where security cameras were positioned, and more importantly, where their coverage had gaps. As she passed the base gymnasium, she heard the unmistakable sounds of physical training, weights clanking, people counting out repetitions, an instructor's voice calling cadence. Through the windows, she could see a group working through a circuit training routine. They moved with the synchronized intensity of a team preparing for something specific, probably an upcoming physical readiness test or qualification course. Sarah felt a pang of something that might have been envy or nostalgia. She missed the simplicity of pure physical training, the straightforward challenge of pushing her body to its limits without having to hide her capabilities. Some of her fondest memories from SEAL training were of the brutal physical evolutions where success or failure was measured in objective metrics, times, distances, weights. No politics, no hidden agendas, just the honest test of whether you could meet the standard. She continued her walk, moving toward the waterfront side of the base where the communication center was located. This was where she'd officially be working for the duration of her assignment, maintaining and updating radio equipment, running diagnostic tests on encrypted communication systems, and generally performing the routine technical work that kept a naval base connected to the broader military network. The facility was quiet this late in the afternoon, with only a skeleton crew on duty. Sarah checked in with the watch supervisor, a Master Chief Petty Officer named Rodriguez, who had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades at sea. He was in his late 50s, with steel gray hair cut high and tight, and eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Martinez?" he said, looking up from his paperwork. "Communications specialist from Norfolk?" "Yes, Master Chief," Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral and professional. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, his gaze more penetrating than the casual glances she'd received from others. Something in his expression suggested he'd seen thousands of sailors come and go, and he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to assess people quickly. "You're smaller than most of the techs we get through here," he observed, his tone neither critical nor curious, just stating a fact. Sarah had heard variations of this comment her entire adult life. "I find that most of the work involves more troubleshooting and precision than raw strength, Master Chief," A slight smile crossed Rodriguez's face. Fair point. Well, you'll start tomorrow morning at 0800. Today, just familiarize yourself with the layout. We run a tight shop here, everything by the book, no shortcuts, no sloppy work. Understood? Understood, Master Chief. Your workstation will be Terminal 7. Login credentials are in this packet. He handed her a folder. Any questions? No, Master Chief. Dismissed. As Sarah left the communications center, she reflected on the brief interaction. Rodriguez was sharp, she could tell that immediately. He'd noticed her size, which meant he was observant. More importantly, he ran his facility by the book, which suggested he valued protocols and procedures. That could work in her favor or against it, depending on what her investigation uncovered. The sun was lowering toward the horizon now, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah made her way toward the dining facility, joining the flow of personnel heading for evening meal. The facility was a large, institutional building that could seat perhaps 300 people at long tables arranged in neat rows. The walls were decorated with unit patches and photographs of past commanding officers, their stern faces watching over the daily routine of military life. Sarah went through the serving line, selecting standard fare, baked chicken, rice, steamed vegetables, and a roll. Nothing that would draw attention. Nothing that would suggest particular dietary preferences or training requirements. She'd learned to eat whatever was available during her deployments. Sometimes that meant cold rations in a desert outpost, sometimes fresh fruit in a tropical forward operating base, sometimes nothing but protein bars for days on end. This was certainly better than some of the meals she'd endured. Carrying her tray, Sarah scanned the dining facility for a place to sit. The room buzzed with the sound of conversations, laughter, and the clatter of utensils on plates. Most tables were filled with groups, people who already knew each other, had established friendships and working relationships. A few individuals sat alone, absorbed in phones or books. She spotted an empty table near the back corner, somewhat isolated from the main flow of traffic. Perfect for her purposes, it gave her a clear view of the room's entrances and exits while keeping her out of the center of attention. She settled into the seat, positioning herself so her back was to the wall, a habit so ingrained that she didn't even think about it anymore. As she ate, Sarah watched the dynamics playing out around her. There, a group of junior enlisted sailors, probably fresh from basic training, all enthusiasm and nervous energy. At another table, a cluster of petty officers discussing an upcoming inspection with expressions that ranged from confident to concerned. Near the windows, a mixed group including both enlisted and junior officers, their interaction suggesting a tight-knit team that worked well together. And then there was the group that caught her attention. 13 men clustered around two pushed-together tables near the center of the dining facility. They were loud, not quite violating proper decorum, but definitely commanding attention. At the center of the group sat a man who was clearly their leader, broad-shouldered, probably 6'2", with the kind of presence that drew eyes even in a crowded room. His name tape read Drummond, and from the chevrons and rockers on his collar, she could see he was a Staff Sergeant E6, Senior Enlisted Leadership. The others in his group ranged from E3 to E5, a mix of ranks but all sharing a similar energy, confident to the point of swagger, physical specimens who carried themselves like athletes or warriors. They laughed loudly at each other's jokes, their body language expansive and territorial. Sarah observed, and them with the detached assessment she'd learned to apply to any potential threat. Drummond was clearly the alpha, the one the others looked to for cues on how to react. To his right sat another large man, whose name tape read Harrison, Texas flag patch visible on his shoulder, probably the Tex type she'd encountered before. On Drummond's left, a slightly smaller but more compact individual named Rodrageze, whose movements suggested martial arts training or boxing experience. As she watched, one of the group, a lean man with sharp features named Walsh, leaned over and said something to Drummond while glancing in Sarah's direction. She saw Drummond's eyes flick toward her, assess her briefly, and then dismiss her with an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Whatever Walsh had said, Drummond apparently didn't find her interesting enough to warrant further attention. Also good, Sarah thought. Let them underestimate. Let them ignore. She finished her meal in silence, dropped her tray at the collection station, and headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow she'd begin her real work, the careful observation and documentation that would form the basis of her report. Tonight, she needed to review her mission parameters, establish her communication protocols with her handlers, and prepare for what she hoped would be an uneventful 6 weeks of quiet evaluation. As Sarah walked back across the base in the gathering dusk, she allowed herself a moment of honest reflection. This assignment was supposed to be relatively simple, certainly nothing like the combat operations she'd conducted overseas, the high-risk missions that had earned her commendations and put scars on her body that would never fully fade. She was supposed to observe, document, and report. No dramatic confrontations, no physical altercations, no situations where her real identity would be revealed. But somewhere in the back of her mind, the part of her consciousness that had been honed by years of operating in unpredictable environments, a small voice whispered a warning: nothing ever goes according to plan. She shook off the thought and focused on the task ahead. 4 to 6 weeks, maintain her cover. Complete her evaluation. Move on to the next assignment. Simple. The next 3 days passed in a routine that Sarah found almost meditative in its simplicity. She reported to the communications center at 0800, where Master Chief Rodriguez assigned her maintenance tasks on various radio and encrypted communication systems. The work was well within her capabilities. In fact, it was considerably simpler than the advanced systems she'd worked with during her SEAL deployments, but she performed each task methodically, deliberately taking slightly longer than necessary to avoid appearing too proficient. Rodriguez watched her work with the careful attention of a supervisor who took his responsibilities seriously. She could feel his evaluation in those first days, assessing whether she was competent, reliable, and trustworthy. Sarah made sure to ask appropriate questions, not too many, which would suggest incompetence, but enough to seem like someone learning the specific procedures of a new facility. "You've got steady hands?" Rodriguez commented on her second day, observing as she performed delicate soldering work on a circuit board. "That's good. Half the techs we get are too impatient for precision work." "I find it calming, Master Chief," Sarah replied, which was true. "The focus required kind of clears everything else out." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. This work is about patience and attention to detail. Rush it, and you'll spend twice as long fixing your mistakes." In the evenings, Sarah continued her broader facility assessment. She walked the base at different times, noting patterns in security patrols, identifying areas where procedures weren't being followed correctly, and documenting equipment that should have been secured, but was left accessible. Nothing catastrophic, no glaring security breaches, but enough minor issues to suggest that protocols had become relaxed through routine complacency. She also paid attention to the people. Who showed leadership initiative? Who cut corners? Which supervisors were respected by their subordinates, and which ruled through fear or indifference? These observations would form a crucial part of her report. The evaluation wasn't just about systems and procedures, but about the human element that made those systems work or fail. And she watched the group of 13. They seemed to operate as a self-contained unit within the larger base population, always together during off-duty hours, training as a group in the gym, eating at the same tables in the dining facility. Sarah learned their names through careful observation. Staff Sergeant Marcus Drummond, the clear leader. Tyler "Tex" Harrison, his right-hand man with the Texas swagger. James Rodriguez. No relation to Master Chief Rodriguez, the martial arts enthusiast. Kevin Walsh, who seemed to be the intellectual tactician of the group. And 9 others, whose names she catalogued: Chen, Morrison, Davis, Williams, Foster, Palmer, Green, Jackson, and Torres. They were a diverse group ethnically and geographically, but unified in their physical prowess and apparent camaraderie. From conversations she'd overheard, Sarah learned they were all part of a specialized security team that had recently completed advanced training together. They were waiting for their next assignment, currently in a kind of holding pattern that left them with considerable free time and energy to burn. What concerned Sarah was the subtle edge of aggression that ran through their interactions with others. They weren't overtly bullying anyone, but there was an undercurrent of dominance, a need to establish themselves at the top of the social hierarchy. She'd seen this pattern before in military units' high-performing teams. that bonded through shared challenge sometimes developed an us versus them mentality that could turn toxic if not properly managed. On her fourth evening at the base, Sarah entered the dining facility later than usual, around 1,900 hours instead of her typical 1,730. She'd been delayed finishing a diagnostic test on a temperamental radio system, and Master Chief Rodriguez had insisted she complete it properly rather than rush. The result was that the dining facility was much less crowded than usual, with perhaps only 50 personnel scattered across the large space. The group of 13 was there, clustered at their usual tables. Sarah collected her meal, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, and looked for a place to sit. Her preferred corner table was occupied by a pair of junior officers deep in conversation. She selected another isolated spot, this one with an acceptable but not ideal sightline to the exits. As she sat down and began to eat, Sarah became aware that the 13 had noticed her arrival. More specifically, Kevin Walsh had noticed, and he'd said something to Marcus Drummond that caused the larger man to turn and look directly at her. For several seconds, Drummond's gaze held on Sarah, assessing her with an intensity that went beyond casual interest. She kept her expression neutral, not meeting his eyes directly, but aware of his attention in her peripheral vision. Finally, he turned back to his group, saying something that caused several of them to laugh. Sarah continued eating, but her awareness had shifted into a higher state of alertness. The predatory part of her brain, the part that had been trained to recognize threats and calculate responses, was noting details, the 13's positions relative to her location, their physical capabilities based on observed size and movement patterns, potential weapons of opportunity in the environment, escape routes if the situation escalated. They're just looking, she told herself. Curiosity, maybe boredom. Nothing to worry about. But she didn't quite believe it. And in doze. Men a climb. 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 10 minutes later, as she was finishing her meal, Sarah saw Tyler Harrison stand up from the group's table and walk deliberately toward her. He moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. His considerable size, probably 6'1" and 200 pounds, used unconsciously as an intimidation tool. He stopped at her table, looking down at her with an expression that wasn't quite hostile, but certainly wasn't friendly. "Hey there," he said, his Texas accent pronounced. "You're new here, right? Saw you come in a few days ago." Sarah looked up, keeping her face pleasantly neutral. "That's right. Just transferred in." "From where?" "Norfolk." Harrison nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something. "Norfolk, huh? Desk job?" "Communications specialist," Sarah replied, offering only the minimum information necessary. "Yeah, I figured something like that." His tone carried a subtle condescension. "You got a name?" "Martinez." "Well, Martinez, my buddies and I were just wondering if you might want to come join us. You've been eating alone every night. Seems kind of unfriendly." The invitation sounded more like a challenge than a genuine offer of companionship. Sarah's instincts were screaming warnings now. This wasn't a friendly approach, it was a test, a probe to see how she'd react. She'd seen this pattern before, usually from insecure individuals who needed to establish dominance over anyone they perceived as vulnerable or different. "I appreciate the offer," she said calmly, "but I'm actually just about finished. Another time, maybe." Harrison's expression shifted slightly, registering her polite refusal as a form of rejection. "Another time," he repeated, his tone suggesting there wouldn't be another time, not on these terms. "You know, we don't bite. Just trying to be welcoming to new people." "And I appreciate that." Sarah maintained her pleasant but firm demeanor. "Like I said, another time." For a moment, Harrison seemed to consider pressing the issue. Then he shrugged, the gesture theatrical enough to be visible to his watching friends. "Suit yourself. Just seems like someone your size might want some friends around. Base can be a tough place for people who aren't built for it." The comment was carefully calculated, offensive enough to sting, vague enough to be defended as concern if challenged. Sarah had heard countless variations of it throughout her military career. This idea that her size somehow disqualified her from belonging in what was perceived as a male-dominated environment. She met Harrison's eyes directly for the first time, holding his gaze with the kind of steady, unblinking eye contact that carried its own message. I've managed just fine so far. But thank you for your concern. Something flickered across Harrison's face, confusion, maybe, or the first hint of uncertainty. Sarah's complete lack of intimidation wasn't the response he'd expected. Most people, especially those who matched her apparent profile, would have either become defensive and aggressive or shown signs of fear or submission. She'd done neither, instead maintaining a calm professionalism that didn't quite fit with his assumptions. Yeah, well, Harrison said, recovering his swagger, offers there if you change your mind. He walked back to his table, where the group immediately leaned in to hear his report. Sarah saw him shrug and say something. Saw Drummond's eyes narrow slightly as he processed whatever Harrison had told him. Several of the others glanced in her direction with expressions ranging from curiosity to amusement to something that might have been respect. Sarah finished her meal, cleared her tray, and left the dining facility at a normal pace, not rushing, not dawdling, giving no indication that the interaction had bothered her in the slightest. But as she walked back to her quarters in the cooling evening air, she allowed herself to acknowledge what her instincts had been telling her: this wasn't over. The group of 13 had identified her as different, as someone outside their social circle who might be vulnerable to their particular brand of dominance. They'd tested her with Harrison's approach, and she'd responded in a way that clearly hadn't satisfied them. Now they'd either lose interest and move on to other entertainment, or they'd escalate. Based on what she'd observed of their group dynamics over the past few days, Sarah suspected it would be the latter. Back in her quarters, she retrieved the encrypted communication device from its hiding place and sent a brief status report to her handlers. Day 4, cover holding. Initial facility assessment proceeding normally. Minor personnel dynamics developing but manageable. No immediate concerns. The response came back within minutes. Acknowledged. Continue as planned. Maintain low profile. Extraction available if situation becomes untenable. Sarah stored the device away and sat on her bed, allowing herself a moment of honest assessment. She could feel the familiar weight of operational stress beginning to build, the constant vigilance required to maintain a cover identity, the suppression of her natural responses and capabilities, the careful calculation of every word and action to avoid breaking character. 4 days down. Potentially 38 more to go. She could do this. She'd endured far worse during Hell Week and SEAL training, during the isolation and interrogation resistance training, during actual combat operations, where mistakes meant death. This was just a different kind of test, one that required patience and discipline rather than physical prowess or tactical brilliance. But as she lay back on her bed and closed her eyes, Sarah found herself thinking about the group of 13, about Marcus Drummond's calculating assessment and Tyler Harrison's subtle threat. She'd spent years learning to read people, to anticipate how situations would develop, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that this situation wasn't finished developing. Just maintain the cover, she told herself. Avoid confrontation. Stay invisible. Even as she thought it, though, a deeper part of her consciousness, the part forged in the crucible of SEAL training and tested in real combat, was already running through tactical assessments and response calculations. Not because she wanted conflict, but because her training had taught her to always be prepared for it, whether she sought it or not. The next 2 days brought a subtle but noticeable escalation in attention from the group of 13. It started small, lingering looks as Sarah entered or left the dining facility, whispered conversations that would pause when she passed nearby, an occasional laugh that seemed deliberately timed to her presence. Nothing overtly aggressive, nothing she could officially complain about, but a clear message that she remained on their radar. Sarah continued her routine with studied normalcy, neither acknowledging nor responding to their attention. She reported to the communications center each morning, performed her assigned maintenance tasks, conducted her broader facility assessments during her free time, and maintained her carefully constructed cover as an unremarkable communications specialist from Norfolk. On day 6, Master Chief Rodriguez assigned her a more complex task, diagnosing and repairing a fault in one of the facility's encrypted satellite communication systems. The equipment was sophisticated, used for secure communications with naval assets deployed worldwide, and the intermittent fault had frustrated several other technicians. "Martinez," Rodriguez said, handing her the work order. The last 3 techs couldn't pin down the source of the problem. Its intermittent shows up maybe once every 50 transmissions, causes a brief signal degradation that corrects itself. Could be hardware, could be software, could be environmental interference. I want you to take a crack at it. Sarah reviewed the documentation, noting the symptoms and the unsuccessful troubleshooting attempts. When does it typically occur, Master Chief? Any pattern to the timing? That's what the others couldn't figure out. Seems random. Sarah spent the next 4 hours working on the problem, methodically testing different hypotheses. She started with the obvious possibilities: loose connections, degraded components, power fluctuations, before moving into more subtle potential causes. Her approach was systematic and thorough, the result of training that had emphasized the importance of detailed analysis and careful problem-solving. Around hour 3, as she was testing the system's grounding connections with a sensitive voltage meter, she noticed something unusual: a slight electromagnetic interference spike that correlated with certain facility operations. After another hour of testing and correlation, she identified the source. When a specific radar system in an adjacent building cycled through its calibration routine, it created a brief electromagnetic pulse that penetrated inadequate shielding in the satellite communications equipment. The fix required reinforcing the shielding on 3 vulnerable connection points, technical work that demanded precision and an understanding of electromagnetic propagation that went beyond standard communications training. Sarah completed the modification, tested it thoroughly, and documented her findings in detailed technical language. When Rodriguez reviewed her work, his expression shifted from professional interest to something closer to surprise. "You traced the interference to the AN-SPY-6 calibration cycle?" he said, referring to the radar system by its technical designation. "Yes, Master Chief. The timing correlation was too consistent to be coincidental." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. That's good work, Martinez. Really good work. Most techs wouldn't have even thought to look at external EM sources, and even fewer would have identified the specific source." He paused, then asked, "Where did you learn to do electromagnetic interference analysis at this level?" Sarah had anticipated this question. Her cover story included plausible explanations for various skills, but she had to be careful not to overplay her hand. "I took some advanced courses at Norfolk, Master Chief. Had an instructor who was really into EM theory and propagation. He said most communication problems trace back to interference of one kind or another." It was a reasonable explanation, vague enough to be difficult to verify but specific enough to sound credible. Rodriguez nodded slowly, seeming to accept it, but Sarah could see in his eyes that he'd filed this information away, adding it to whatever assessment he was building of her capabilities. "Well, whoever that instructor was, he taught you well. Good work. I'll make sure it goes in your evaluation." That evening, Sarah found herself running later than usual again, due to another extended project this time, updating security protocols on the facility's communication network. By the time she reached the dining facility, it was 1,915 hours, and the crowd had thinned significantly. The group of 13 was there, as they seemed to be every evening. This time, as Sarah collected her meal and looked for a seat, Marcus Drummond stood up from his table and walked directly toward her. He was even more imposing up close, probably 6'2" and 220 pounds of solid muscle, with the kind of physical presence that came from years of intensive training. His face was square-jawed and conventionally handsome, but his eyes held a calculating intelligence that suggested there was more to him than just physical capability. "Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone accustomed to command. "Mind if I have a word?" Sarah kept her expression neutral. "Of course, Staff Sergeant. I wanted to apologize if my buddy Harrison came on a little strong the other night. He means well, but subtlety isn't his strong suit." Drummond's smile was calculated to be disarming. "We really were just trying to be welcoming." "No offense taken," Sarah replied evenly. Good. Drummond paused, studying her face. "You know, we've been watching you around the base. You keep to yourself, don't socialize much. That's your choice, of course. But it got us curious. Where'd you say you transferred from?" "Norfolk." "Right, Norfolk. Desk job there?" "Communications maintenance, Mostly routine systems work. Drummond nodded, but his eyes never left her face, searching for something. Must be quite a change, coming to a training facility like this. More operational tempo, younger personnel. Do you miss the desk work? The question had layers. It could be innocent curiosity, or it could be probing for information about her background and capabilities. Sarah opted for a response that was truthful enough to be believable, but vague enough to discourage follow-up questions. Every assignment has its challenges and advantages. I'm adapting fine. I'm sure you are. Drummond shifted his weight slightly, a subtle movement that positioned him more directly in her path. Thing is, Martinez, some of my guys have been wondering about you. You're different from most of the personnel we see rotating through here. Quieter. More. He searched for the word. Self-contained. That can make people curious. Sarah recognized this for what it was. A fishing expedition. Drummond was trying to get her to reveal more about herself, either through her words or through her reactions. It was actually a fairly sophisticated approach, much more subtle than Harrison's blunt confrontation. I've never been much for socializing, Sarah said simply. I prefer to focus on my work, and you're good at your work, from what I hear. Master Chief Rodriguez mentioned you solved some problem with the satellite comms that had stumped several other techs. So they're asking about me, Sarah thought, gathering information. That was concerning. It suggested their interest went beyond simple boredom or curiosity. I got lucky, Sarah said, deflecting the compliment. Right combination of circumstances to identify the source of the interference. Drummond smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Luck. Sure. Well, Martinez, I just wanted to introduce myself properly and let you know that if you ever want to train with us PT, hand to hand, that sort of thing, you'd be welcome. We run a pretty intense program, but I think you might find it interesting. The invitation was ostensibly friendly, but Sarah heard the challenge underneath it. Come prove yourself in our world. On our terms, where we can demonstrate our superiority. I appreciate the offer, Staff Sergeant, but I'm good with my own PT routine. Your own routine. Drummond's tone shifted slightly, becoming more pointed. No offense, but you're what, 5'4"? Maybe 110 pounds? The military has physical standards for a reason. It's important to push yourself, make sure you can handle the demands of the job. And there it was, the implicit suggestion that her size made her inadequate, that she didn't meet some undefined standard that he and his group represented. Sarah had heard variations of this argument countless times, from BUD/S instructors testing her determination to fellow operators questioning whether she belonged among SEALs. Each time, she'd responded the same way, by demonstrating competence so undeniable that the questions eventually stopped. But here, maintaining her cover meant she couldn't demonstrate anything. She had to accept the implication, swallow the insult, and continue playing her role as an unremarkable communication specialist who happened to be smaller than average. I stay fit enough for my duties, Sarah said, her voice still calm but with a subtle edge that carried its own message. This conversation is over. Drummond caught the change in her tone, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or a glimmer of respect for someone who wouldn't be easily intimidated. But it passed quickly, replaced by his earlier calculating expression. Well, the offer stands. We're usually at the gym between 0600 and 0730 if you change your mind. He stepped aside, clearing her path. Enjoy your dinner, Martinez. Sarah nodded acknowledgement and moved to a table, acutely aware that all 13 members of Drummond's group were watching the interaction. As she sat down and began to eat, she could hear fragments of their resumed conversation, not the specific words, but the tone and cadence that suggested analysis and discussion. She was becoming a problem for them, a puzzle they couldn't solve. In their experience, someone her size would either avoid them entirely, become defensive and aggressive in an attempt to compensate for physical disadvantage, or show signs of intimidation. Sarah's consistent calm, her complete lack of either submission or aggression, didn't fit their mental models. Good. Part of her thought, let them be confused. But another part, the tactical, operational part that had kept her alive in dangerous situations, was calculating probabilities and assessing risks. Drummond was smart, more sophisticated than Harrison in his approach. He was gathering information, building a profile, trying to understand who she really was. That kind of focused attention was dangerous to her mission. After dinner, Sarah made her way to the base library, a small facility that stayed open until 2100 for personnel who wanted quiet study space. She needed to update her mission log and send another status report to her handlers, but the library offered something else: public computer terminals with encrypted communication access. She signed in, selected a terminal in a corner where she could observe the room's entrance, and opened a secure connection to her handlers, using protocols that would make the communication appear to be routine personal email. Her coded message outlined the developing situation with Drummond's group, noting their unusual interest and her assessment that they might be gathering information about her background. The response took longer than usual, nearly 20 minutes, which suggested her handlers were consulting with higher-level decision-makers. When it finally came, the message was brief but clear. Situation noted. Continue mission as planned. Avoid confrontation if possible, but protect cover at all costs. If compromise is imminent, authorization granted to break character as necessary. Extraction team on standby. Sarah read the message twice, noting the significance of the authorization. Her handlers rarely granted permission to break cover. It meant they recognized the situation had potential to escalate beyond her ability to manage through passive means. The mention of an extraction team on standby was even more significant. It meant they were taking the threat seriously, enough to position resources for rapid response if needed. She cleared her message history, logged out, and sat for a moment in thought. The smart move, the move that would preserve her mission and allow her to complete her evaluation, would be to avoid Drummond's group entirely. Change her routine, eat at different times, stay away from locations where they congregated. It would work, at least for a few weeks, until she could finish her assessment and move on. But Sarah's training and experience told her that avoidance sometimes only delayed the inevitable. If Drummond had decided she was an interesting puzzle to solve, he'd keep probing until he got answers. And the more she avoided, the more suspicious her behavior would appear, potentially compromising her cover even more effectively than direct confrontation. There was also a part of her she tried to keep suppressed during undercover operations that bristled at the idea of running from a confrontation. She'd earned her place among the Navy SEALs through extraordinary effort and sacrifice. She'd proven herself in combat operations where lives depended on her competence. The idea of hiding from a group of oversized bullies who thought size equaled capability grated against everything she'd fought to become. Stay professional, she reminded herself. This isn't about ego. It's about the mission. She left the library and headed back to her quarters, making the walk quickly as the base transitioned into evening routine. Streetlights flickered on, and the activity level dropped as personnel headed to their berthing areas or off base for evening liberty. The air had cooled, carrying the salt smell of the nearby ocean mixed with the diesel exhaust from a departing vehicle. As she turned a corner near her building, Sarah's peripheral vision caught movement, multiple figures emerging from the shadow of an adjacent structure. She recognized them immediately. 5 members of Drummond's group, including James Rodriguez and Tyler Harrison. They weren't moving aggressively, but they'd positioned themselves to intercept her path, creating a situation where she'd have to either acknowledge them or make an obvious effort to avoid them. Sarah maintained her pace and trajectory, giving no indication that she'd noticed anything unusual. As she drew closer, Harrison stepped slightly more into the path, forcing her to either stop or walk around him. She stopped, looking up at him with an expression of polite inquiry. "Evening, Harrison?" "Martinez," Harrison replied, his Texas drawl more pronounced than usual. "Funny running into you here. We were just heading back from the gym." All 5 of them were indeed wearing PT gear, though they looked remarkably fresh for people who'd supposedly just finished working out. Their positioning 3 behind Harrison and 1 on each side created a loose semicircle that wasn't quite threatening but definitely felt intentional. "Small base," Sarah observed neutrally. James Rodriguez stepped forward, his compact frame radiating the controlled energy of someone with serious martial arts training. "Hey, We were actually talking about you earlier. Staff Sergeant Drummond mentioned he invited you to train with us. He did, and you turned him down. I have my own PT routine. Rodriguez smiled, but it had an edge to it. See? That's what's interesting. You say you have your own routine, but nobody ever sees you in the gym. You don't run with any of the groups around the base. So we're curious, what exactly is your PT routine? The question was designed to put her on the defensive, to force her either to admit she didn't train seriously, which would validate their assumptions about her inadequacy, or to provide details that might reveal more about her real capabilities. I prefer to train early, before the facilities get crowded, Sarah said, which was truthful. She'd been doing brief, careful workout sessions at 0500 hours when the gym was mostly empty, deliberately keeping her routine light enough not to draw attention. Early morning, huh? Harrison moved slightly closer, reducing the distance between them. What kind of training? Cardio? Light weights? Sarah recognized the trap in the question. Answer with specifics, and she'd be providing information they could verify or challenge. Answer vaguely, and she'd appear evasive. Either way, she'd be playing their game, responding to their interrogation. Time to shift the dynamic. Is there a reason for these questions? Sarah asked directly, her tone still polite but with an undertone that suggested she wasn't intimidated by their numbers or positioning. Because I have an early morning tomorrow, and I'd like to get some rest. The directness of her response seemed to surprise them. Most people, especially those who matched her profile, would have continued engaging with their questions, either defensively or apologetically. Sarah's calm refusal to play along disrupted their expected pattern. Rodriguez exchanged a quick glance with Harrison, a silent communication about how to proceed. Harrison shrugged slightly and stepped back, opening the path. No reason, just making conversation. We'll let you get your beauty sleep. The comment was dismissive, designed to diminish her even as they backed off. Sarah walked past them without responding, maintaining her steady pace. As she did, she heard one of the others, she thought it was the one called Chen, mutter something that got muffled laughs from the group. Back in her quarters, Sarah stood for a moment with her door closed, allowing herself to acknowledge what had just happened. That wasn't random, it was a coordinated intercept, planned and executed with enough subtlety to maintain deniability. They weren't just curious anymore. They were actively investigating her, testing her responses, looking for weaknesses or inconsistencies in her cover story. This was escalating faster than she'd anticipated. In her experience, this kind of focused group attention on an individual usually had two possible endings. Either the group lost interest and moved on, or the situation escalated to some form of confrontation. Given Drummond's evident intelligence and the group's cohesion, she suspected they wouldn't simply lose interest. Sarah pulled out her encrypted device and sent another update to her handlers. Group of 13 showing coordinated interest, conducted planned intercept this evening. Assessment, situation likely to escalate. Request guidance on whether to abort mission and extract or continue with increased risk of cover compromise. This time, the response came quickly. Continue mission. Authorization stands. Protect cover by any means necessary. If situation forces confrontation, higher command has confidence in your judgment. Remember, these are friendly personnel, not enemy combatants. Minimize any necessary response. The reminder in that last sentence was important. If this escalated to physical confrontation, which seemed increasingly likely, Sarah would need to remember that Drummond and his people weren't enemy fighters. They were U.S. military personnel, possibly misguided and definitely overstepping boundaries, but not hostile forces. Any response would need to be carefully calibrated to end the threat without causing serious injury. I can do that, Sarah thought. I've done harder things. But as she prepared for bed, going through the routine of checking her alarm and laying out her uniform for the morning, Sarah found herself running through tactical calculations, despite her intention to focus on maintaining cover. Old instincts were hard to suppress. If confronted by 13 opponents, what would be the optimal response? How could she neutralize multiple attackers while minimizing injury to all parties? Stop it, she told herself firmly. You're not going to fight them. You're going to avoid confrontation, maintain your cover, and complete your mission. Even as she thought it, though, the tactical part of her brain was noting that her quarters had good sightlines to the door, that her duffel bag could be used as both shield and weapon if necessary, that the small desk could be quickly overturned to create an obstacle. Old habits, she thought with grim humor. They really do die hard. She set her alarm for 0430 early enough to complete a workout and be out of the gym before Drummond's group arrived at 0600 and lay down to sleep. Tomorrow would be day 7 of her mission. 3 more days, and she'd have completed her first full week. Just 30-some-odd days more to go. As she drifted toward sleep, Sarah's last conscious thought was a recognition that felt uncomfortably like premonition. Something's going to break. Soon. Day 7 began like the previous 6. Sarah's alarm sounded at 0430, and she was dressed and out the door by 0445. The base was still mostly dark, with only essential lighting illuminating the pathways between buildings. A handful of early risers moved through the pre-dawn quiet, serious runners getting their miles in before the heat of the day, duty personnel changing shifts, the occasional insomniac walking off restless energy. Sarah made her way to the gym, a squat concrete building that never quite lost the smell of sweat and rubber flooring no matter how much industrial cleaner was applied. At this hour, it was nearly empty, just 2 sailors doing cardio on treadmills at the far end, each absorbed in their own workout and paying no attention to anyone else. Perfect. She moved to a corner area where she could work through a carefully modulated routine. Nothing too intense, nothing that would demonstrate the capabilities she'd developed through years of SEAL training. She did bodyweight exercises, push-ups, pull-ups, air squats, keeping her numbers respectable but not exceptional. An observer would see someone who was fit and disciplined, but not extraordinary. What they wouldn't see were the 1,000 small adjustments she was making, deliberately sloppy form on her pull-ups to disguise her actual grip strength, breathing harder than necessary to suggest more effort than she was actually expending, stopping her sets earlier than her muscles demanded. It was like writing with her non-dominant hand, while pretending it was natural. By 0600, as the facility began to fill with the morning rush of personnel, Sarah was finishing her cool-down and preparing to leave. She'd timed it perfectly. The group of 13 arrived just as she was heading for the door. She saw them enter, saw Marcus Drummond's eyes track her movement, saw the brief flicker of calculation cross his face. But she was already leaving, giving him no opportunity to engage in conversation or issue another invitation that was really a challenge. Small victory, but she'd take it. The rest of the morning passed in routine maintenance work at the communications center. Master Chief Rodriguez was reviewing supply requisitions when Sarah arrived, and he barely looked up as she logged in and checked her daily assignments. She spent the next 4 hours updating software on the facility's encrypted email system, methodical work that required attention to detail but not creative problem-solving. At 1145, she broke for lunch, heading to the dining facility during the early seating when it would be less crowded. She'd learned that timing her meals strategically could minimize unwanted interactions, arrive early or late, avoid the peak periods when Drummond's group typically ate. But as she entered the dining facility, Sarah immediately noticed that something was different. The group of 13 was already there, seated at their usual clustered tables, despite the early hour. And they weren't eating, they were waiting. Her tactical awareness ramped up instantly, adrenaline beginning its familiar trickle into her bloodstream. The positioning was too deliberate, their attention too focused. This wasn't coincidence. Abort, part of her brain suggested. Turn around, leave, come back later. But that would be running, and running would only delay whatever they had planned. Besides, her cover identity wouldn't run. Petty Officer Martinez had no reason to avoid the dining facility just because some other personnel happened to be there. Sarah collected her tray and moved through the serving line, selecting her meal with careful normalcy: grilled chicken sandwich, side salad, fruit cup, water. She paid with her meal card and turned to survey the seating options. The dining facility was unusually empty for lunchtime, maybe 20 other personnel scattered across the large space, most of them near the windows on the opposite side from where Drummond's group sat. Whether this was natural or whether the 13 had somehow encouraged others to sit elsewhere, Sarah couldn't tell. Her usual corner table was available. She walked toward it with steady steps, neither hurrying nor hesitating, giving no indication that she'd noticed anything unusual. But every sense was heightened now, tracking the positions of the 13, calculating distances and angles, identifying potential weapons and obstacles in the environment. She'd just set her tray down when she heard the scrape of chairs, multiple chairs, moving in coordination. Turning, she saw all 13 of them standing up from their tables and beginning to walk in her direction. The movement was coordinated but not overtly aggressive. They weren't charging or running, just walking with purpose. To a casual observer, it might look like a group heading somewhere together that happened to take them past her table. But Sarah recognized the formation. They were positioning themselves to surround her, cutting off angles of retreat. Marcus Drummond led the approach, with Tyler Harrison and James Rodriguez flanking him. The other 10 spread out in a loose arc, creating a semicircle that would become a full circle once they reached her position. Sarah remained standing, her hands visible and relaxed at her sides, her posture alert but not aggressive. Her tray sat on the table behind her. The wall was 3 feet to her left. She had maybe 15 seconds before they completed their encirclement. Last chance to de-escalate, she thought. Try words first. Gentlemen, she said as they approached, her voice calm and clear, pitched to carry but not shouting. Can I help you with something? Drummond stopped about 6 feet away, the others arranging themselves in their planned positions. Sarah did a quick assessment. 13 men, ranging from probably 180 pounds to Harrison's 210, heights from 5 to 10 to Drummond's 6 to 2. All fit, all trained, all confident in their numbers and physical advantages. Martinez, Drummond said, his voice carrying that same calculated friendliness he'd used in their previous conversation. We've been talking about you. Trying to figure you out. I'm not that complicated, Staff Sergeant. I'm a communications technician doing my job. See, that's what you keep saying. But there's something about you that doesn't add up. Drummond took a step closer. You're too calm, too composed. You move like someone with real training, not just basic and A school. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she was cursing. He was more observant than she'd given him credit for. Most people wouldn't notice the subtle differences in how she carried herself, but Drummond apparently had enough experience with genuine military professionals to recognize the signs. I take my fitness seriously, Sarah said, but I don't see how that's any concern of yours. It becomes our concern when someone shows up with an incomplete story and starts poking around the base asking questions. This from Kevin Walsh, who'd moved to Sarah's right side. We know you've been walking the facility at odd hours, noting security patterns, observing procedures. Damn. They'd been watching her as carefully as she'd been watching them. Her facility assessment, the walk she'd been taking to document security protocols and procedures, had been noticed and interpreted as suspicious behavior. I'm familiarizing myself with the base, Sarah said. That's not unusual for new arrivals. At 2,200 hours, taking notes? Walsh's tone was sharp. We're not stupid, Martinez, or whoever you really are. We've been comparing observations, and you don't fit. Your cover story has holes. Your skills don't match your supposed background, and you move like an operator, not a comtech. The situation was deteriorating faster than Sarah had anticipated. They'd conducted an actual investigation, pooling their observations and reaching conclusions that were dangerously close to the truth. She could try to continue denying it, but that would only make them more aggressive in their attempts to prove their theory. I don't know what you think you've figured out, Sarah said carefully, but you're mistaken. Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd step back and let me eat my lunch. Not quite yet. Drummond moved closer, now only about 4 feet away. The others tightened their circle. Here's what we think. You're some kind of inspector or investigator. Maybe NCIS, maybe internal affairs, maybe something else. You're here checking up on base security, looking for violations or weaknesses to report. It was a reasonable theory, actually not correct, but close enough that Sarah could see how they'd reached it. And if they believed she was an investigator, they might see her as a threat to their careers or unit. That's an interesting theory, Sarah said. It's also wrong, and even if it were right, confronting a supposed investigator like this would be an incredibly poor decision. Would it? James Rodriguez grinned, cracking his knuckles in a gesture that was clearly meant to be intimidating. Or would it just be a bunch of guys trying to have a friendly conversation with someone who's been unfriendly since she arrived? The rest of the dining facility had gone quiet. The 20 or so other personnel present had noticed the confrontation and were watching with varying expressions of concern and interest. None of them were moving to intervene, probably assuming this was some kind of internal military matter they shouldn't get involved in. Sarah made one final attempt at de-escalation. "Staff Sergeant Drummond, I'm asking you clearly and directly. Please step back and allow me to return to my meal. Whatever concerns you have about my presence here, this is not the appropriate way to address them." Drummond studied her face, seeming to weigh his options. For a moment, Sarah thought he might actually back down, his intelligence warring with his ego and his need to prove his theory. Then Tyler Harrison spoke up from behind him. "Come on, Marcus, she's been jerking us around for a week. Let's find out what she's really made of." The comment tipped the balance. Drummond's expression hardened, and he took another step forward, now close enough that he could reach her if he extended his arm. "Here's what's going to happen," Drummond said, his voice low and controlled. "You're going to come with us somewhere private where we can have a real conversation about who you are and why you're here. You can come voluntarily, or we can make it happen. Your choice." And there it was, the line crossed. They were now explicitly threatening to physically detain her, which moved this from intimidation into actual assault territory. Sarah's handlers had given her clear authorization: protect your cover by any means necessary. She looked at Drummond, then slowly swept her gaze across the other 12 faces surrounding her. Most looked confident. A few seemed uncertain, but all were committed to backing their leader's play. They'd come this far. They weren't going to back down now. "Last chance," Sarah said quietly, her voice dropping into a register that carried absolute certainty. "Walk away. All of you. Right now. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one." Something in her tone, or maybe something in her eyes, made a few of them hesitate. But Drummond either didn't notice or didn't care. He reached out, his hand moving toward Sarah's shoulder in a gesture that was meant to forcibly guide her toward the exit. Sarah's response was instantaneous. Her hand shot up with blinding speed, intercepting Drummond's wrist before his fingers could make contact. Her grip locked onto a specific pressure point, her thumb finding the nerve cluster with surgical precision. Drummond's eyes went wide with shock and pain as his nervous system registered the targeted pressure. "I asked you nicely," Sarah said, her voice still calm. "I'm going to ask one more time. Step back." For perhaps 2 seconds, the tableau held. Sarah's small hand gripping Drummond's much larger wrist, her fingers applying pressure that was causing visible distress to a man who outweighed her by more than 100 pounds. The other 12 frozen in surprise at the sudden reversal. Then Tyler Harrison snarled, "Nobody touches Marcus," and lunged forward. And Sarah's cover, her careful construction of being an unremarkable communications specialist, shattered completely. She released Drummond's wrist and sidestepped Harrison's bull rush with minimal movement, her body shifting just enough to let his momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled by, she delivered a precise strike to the nerve cluster just below his ear, not hard enough to cause damage, but perfectly placed to short-circuit his voluntary muscle control. Harrison's legs went out from under him, and he crashed into a table behind Sarah with a tremendous clatter of metal and plastic. Elapsed time, 3 seconds. James Rodriguez came next, moving with the practiced combinations of someone who'd spent years in martial arts training. He threw a quick jab-cross combination that would have been effective against most opponents. Sarah deflected both punches with economical blocks, reading his weight distribution and anticipating his follow-up before he threw it. When his roundhouse kick came telegraphed by the shift in his hips, she trapped his leg mid-extension and used his own momentum to sweep his supporting foot. Rodriguez went down hard, the wind knocked out of him as he hit the floor. Sarah released his leg and spun to face the next threats. Elapsed time, 8 seconds. 3 of them came simultaneously. Now, Chen, Morrison, and Davis, apparently thinking numbers would overwhelm her. It was actually easier than fighting them one at a time because they got in each other's way. Sarah grabbed Chen's outstretched arm and used it as a lever, pulling him off balance and into Morrison's path. Both men tangled and went down. Davis tried to grab her from behind, but she dropped her weight and executed a perfect hip throw that sent him sailing over her shoulder to land controlled and relatively safely on top of his 2 companions. Elapsed time: 15 seconds. Kevin Walsh was more cautious, circling and looking for an opening rather than charging in blindly. He was the smart one, the tactician. He'd been watching, analyzing, recognizing that Sarah's defensive technique was far beyond anything a communications specialist should possess. "What are you?" he breathed, his earlier confidence replaced by dawning comprehension. Sarah didn't answer. She was aware that the other diners had their phones out now, probably recording. This was going to be impossible to explain away. Her cover was completely blown. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to finish this before someone got seriously hurt. Drummond had recovered from the wrist lock and was coming back, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He threw a combination of punches that showed actual boxing training, better technique than the others, more controlled aggression. Sarah blocked, parried, redirected, her movements precise and minimal. She let him throw 4, 5, 6 punches, reading his patterns, waiting for the opening. When it came a slight overextension on a right cross, she stepped inside his guard and delivered a quick combination to his solar plexus and the nerve cluster under his left arm. Drummond gasped, his diaphragm spasming, air suddenly unavailable. Sarah spun him around and applied a blood choke, not a full sleeper hold, just enough pressure to make him woozy and compliant. "Done?" she said quietly in his ear. "Stand down. All of you." She released him, and he dropped to one knee, gulping air. Elapsed time: 28 seconds. The remaining 6 Williams, Foster, Palmer, Green, Jackson, and Torres were still standing, but their earlier confidence had evaporated. They'd just watched their leader and their 6 toughest members get systematically dismantled by someone a third smaller than any of them. The mathematical certainty of their numerical superiority had run headfirst into the reality of skill differential. Torres, to his credit, recognized the situation for what it was. "She's Special Forces, has to be. Nobody moves like that without serious training. Navy SEALs," Walsh said, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and horror. "The way she fights, the precision, the calm. She's got to be a SEAL." Sarah said nothing, maintaining her ready stance. Her breathing was slightly elevated but still controlled. Her uniform was barely disheveled. 7 men were on the floor around her in various states of discomfort and shock, none seriously injured but all thoroughly defeated. The 6 still standing exchanged glances, a silent communication about whether to continue or concede. Finally, Williams raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "We're done," he said. "Whatever you are, whoever you are, we're done." Sarah nodded once. "Smart choice. Now, all of you are going to pick up your friends and get them to medical for evaluation. Then you're going to report to your commanding officer and explain exactly what happened here, all of it, including how you initiated this confrontation. And if we don't?" Drummond wheezed from his position on the floor. Sarah gestured to the other diners, several of whom were still recording on their phones. "There are at least 15 witnesses and probably a dozen videos of what just happened. You can tell the truth now and maybe salvage something from this, or you can lie and have it proven false when those videos surface. Your choice." The logic was undeniable. Drummond nodded slowly, accepting the reality of his situation. As the 13 began the humiliating process of helping each other up and assessing their bruises, Sarah became aware of a new presence at the entrance to the dining facility. Master Chief Rodriguez stood there, his expression unreadable, clearly having arrived in time to witness at least part of the confrontation. Their eyes met across the room, and Sarah saw the calculation happening behind his weathered features. He'd just watched his supposedly inexperienced communications technician take down 13 highly trained security personnel in less than 30 seconds without breaking a sweat or causing serious injury to any of them. "Martinez," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent dining facility, My office. Immediately. Yes, Master Chief. Sarah walked past the 13, past the stunned witnesses, past the tables and trays and the abandoned lunch she'd never gotten to eat. Her mind was already racing through the implications of what had just happened. Her cover was completely compromised. Her mission was potentially unsalvageable. And depending on how the next hour went, she might be facing disciplinary action for assaulting 13 U.S. military personnel, regardless of the fact that they'd initiated the confrontation. Well, she thought with grim humor as she followed Rodriguez toward the communications center, at least I don't have to pretend to be bad at pull-ups anymore. Master Chief Rodriguez's office was a small, utilitarian space that managed to convey both his decades of service and his no-nonsense approach to leadership. The walls held framed photographs from various deployments, commendations, and certificates arranged in precise rows, and a single shelf of technical manuals organized by category. His desk was immaculate, nothing on its surface except a computer monitor, a phone, and a single folder that Sarah suspected contained her personnel file. Rodriguez closed the door behind them and gestured to a chair facing his desk. Sarah sat at attention, her posture military perfect despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. The Master Chief settled into his own chair and studied her for a long moment without speaking. The silence stretched, a classic interrogation technique designed to make the subject uncomfortable enough to start talking. Sarah had been trained to resist far more sophisticated pressure than prolonged silence. She met Rodriguez's gaze steadily and waited. Finally, he opened the folder and glanced at its contents before looking back up at her. Petty Officer Second Class Sarah Martinez, Communications Specialist, transferred from Norfolk 3 weeks ago. Previous duty assignments include. He paused, reading. Routine maintenance and systems administration at various shore facilities. No combat deployments. No special training beyond standard Navy schools. He closed the folder with deliberate slowness. That's what your file says. Now, suppose you tell me what the hell I just watched in that dining facility. Sarah had been anticipating this conversation since the moment Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. She'd gamed out various responses during the walk to his office, weighing options and calculating risks. The truth was that she had authorization to reveal her identity if her cover became untenable, and after taking down 13 people in full view of witnesses with cameras, her cover was definitely untenable. But Rodriguez hadn't been read into her actual mission. For all she knew, he could be part of what she was supposed to be investigating. Revealing everything to the wrong person could compromise not just her mission, but potentially other operations as well. Master Chief, she said carefully, I can't discuss the specifics of my assignment or background without authorization from my chain of command. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. Your chain of command? And who would that be? Exactly, because last I checked, as your direct supervisor, I'm in your chain of command. With respect, Master Chief. My actual chain of command doesn't run through this facility's normal structure. The statement hung in the air between them. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from stern interrogation to something more calculating. Special operations, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sarah remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Rodriguez stood and walked to his office door, checking that it was fully closed and locked. He moved to his computer and typed a series of commands that Sarah recognized he was enabling SCIF protocols, activating the electromagnetic shielding and white noise generators that would prevent electronic surveillance. When he was satisfied with the security measures, he turned back to Sarah. I spent 15 years attached to various special warfare units before I took this posting, Rodriguez said. I've worked alongside SEALs, Rangers, Delta Hell. I've even worked with people whose units don't officially exist. So when I see someone move the way you just moved, with that level of precision and control, I recognize what I'm looking at. He returned to his chair and leaned forward, his voice dropping lower despite the secured room. I'm not asking you to confirm anything that's classified, but I am telling you that whatever is happening here, I can help. Or at the very least, I can avoid making things worse. But I need to know if I should be making some phone calls to people who might be interested in the fact that one of my communications specialists just demonstrated abilities that are well beyond her official record. Sarah evaluated the situation quickly. Rodriguez was clearly read into enough of the special operations world to understand the implications of what he'd witnessed. More importantly, his instinct had been to secure the room and offer help rather than immediately escalate to disciplinary action. That suggested he was someone who could be trusted with at least part of the truth. "I need to make a secure call," Sarah said. "To my actual handlers. They'll need to make the decision about what information can be shared and with whom." Rodriguez nodded and gestured to his phone. "That's a certified secure line. Use extension 727 for outside access." Sarah picked up the handset and dialed the memorized number that would route through several layers of security before reaching her handler at Naval Special Warfare. "Command." The call was answered on the second ring. "Authentication," a male voice said. Sarah provided her operational code phrase, responded to the challenge questions, and waited while her identity was verified through voice print analysis and database cross-reference. The entire process took about 45 seconds. "Martinez, you're calling off schedule." Her handler, a commander named Briggs, whom she'd never met in person, said once the first secure connection was established. "Situation report." "Cover completely compromised," Sarah said crisply. "Physical confrontation with 13 base personnel in full view of witnesses. Master Chief Rodriguez, my immediate supervisor, observed the incident and has requested information about my actual status. He's read into Spec Ops operations and is currently providing secure communication facilities. Request authorization to brief him on relevant portions of my mission." There was a brief pause. Briggs was probably pulling up Rodriguez's security clearance and service record. "Stand by." 3 minutes of silence followed while background checks were run and decisions were made at levels well above Sarah's authority. She was aware of Rodriguez watching her, his expression patient but curious. "Authorization granted." "Briggs," finally said, "you may brief Master Chief Rodriguez on your identity and general mission parameters, but not on specific tactical procedures or ongoing operations beyond this facility. The mission itself is to be considered complete. As of now, we'll extract you tonight at 2200 from the coordinates we discussed during mission prep. Any immediate threats or concerns?" "Negative. The confrontation is resolved. Base personnel involved will require medical evaluation, but no serious injuries sustained." "Understood." "Extraction confirmed for 2200. One more thing. Martinez, we've been monitoring social media and base communication channels. Videos of your incident are already circulating. We're working to contain them, but you should be aware that your demonstration has attracted considerable attention." Of course it had. In the age of smartphones, nothing stayed private. "Acknowledged. Anything else, sir?" "Negative. Secure your position, brief the Master Chief, and wait for extraction. Good work completing as much of the assessment as you did. We'll debrief fully once you're back at Dam Neck." The call ended. Sarah replaced the handset and turned to Rodriguez, who'd maintained his patient observation throughout the conversation. "All right," she said. "I'm authorized to brief you, with some limitations. The truth is, my name is Sarah Martinez. That part wasn't a cover. But I'm not a petty officer second class." She reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew the military ID card she'd kept hidden in its concealed compartment, the one she'd been forbidden to carry anywhere it might be discovered. She handed it to Rodriguez. He examined it carefully, his eyebrows rising slightly as he read. "Lieutenant, Navy SEALs." He looked up at her, a new respect visible in his expression. "SEAL Team 6? I can't confirm specific unit assignments, Master Chief, but yes, I'm a SEAL." Rodriguez handed back her ID, shaking his head with something that might have been admiration. "And here I was thinking you were just a really talented comtech with some martial arts training. What's your actual mission here?" "I've been conducting an undercover evaluation of training protocols, security procedures, and facility readiness," Sarah explained. "It's part of a broader assessment of how well our training facilities prepare personnel for operational deployments. My insertion was supposed to be low profile, observe, document, report. The plan was to spend 4 to 6 weeks here without anyone realizing I was anything other than routine personnel. What went wrong?" Sarah considered the question. Staff Sergeant Drummond is more observant than the mission planners anticipated. He noticed inconsistencies in my behavior and cover story. He and his group conducted their own investigation and concluded correctly that I wasn't what I appeared to be. They thought I was some kind of inspector or investigator, which made them see me as a threat. This morning's confrontation was their attempt to force me to reveal my true purpose. By surrounding you in the dining facility and threatening physical detention, Rodriguez said, his tone making clear what he thought of that tactical decision, which forced you to defend yourself, thereby completely blowing your cover. Exactly. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, processing the information. So those 13 idiots just destroyed a classified operation because they couldn't handle the idea that someone half their size might be more capable than they are. That's one way to put it. Master Chief, it's the accurate way to put it. Rodriguez's expression had hardened. What happens now? I'm being extracted tonight at 2,200. My assessment of this facility will be based on what I was able to observe over the past week, which is incomplete but still useful. The incident with Drummond's group will be included in my report as an example of poor judgment and failure to follow proper channels for addressing concerns about suspicious behavior. They're going to face consequences, Rodriguez said. It wasn't a question. That will be determined by their chain of command, Master Chief. My report will document what happened, but I won't make specific recommendations about disciplinary action. That's not my role. Rodriguez nodded, accepting the boundary. For what it's worth, your assessment of this facility, what have you found? Sarah appreciated the question because it allowed her to focus on the professional aspects of her mission rather than the personal drama of the confrontation. Overall, this is a well-run facility. Security protocols are generally sound, though there are some areas where procedures have become relaxed through routine familiarity. Personnel morale is good, training programs are effective, and leadership at the senior levels appears competent. But, Rodriguez prompted, hearing the unspoken caveat, but there are cultural issues that need attention. The incident with Drummond's group didn't happen in a vacuum. They felt entitled to confront someone they perceived as an outsider, to demand answers they had no authority to demand, and to use implied physical threats when they didn't get compliance. That suggests a broader problem with accountability and adherence to proper procedures for addressing concerns. Rodriguez's expression showed that he understood the implications. You think they've gotten away with similar behavior before. I think they're a high-performing team that's been given considerable autonomy, and that autonomy has led to a sense that they can operate outside normal constraints. It's a common issue with elite or specialized units. They develop an internal culture that sometimes conflicts with broader military standards. The Master Chief was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about the personnel he supervised and the dynamics he might have overlooked. If you'd been able to complete your full assessment, what would you have focused on? Integration between different units and departments. Effectiveness of security training. How well procedures scale from peacetime routine to crisis situations, and whether personnel at all levels understand their actual authorities and constraints. Sarah paused. And I would have spent more time evaluating whether high-performing teams like Drummond's group had adequate oversight to prevent them from becoming insular or developing problematic group dynamics. Well, I guess we'll never know what your complete assessment would have found. Rodriguez glanced at his computer screen, where several notification windows were blinking. Though based on what I'm seeing here, you're about to have company. The security footage from the dining facility has been reviewed by the duty officer, and Lieutenant Commander Hayes, our executive officer, is requesting your presence in her office immediately. Sarah had been expecting this. Should I bring you along, Master Chief, or handle it independently? I'll come. Hayes is by the book, which means she's going to have a lot of questions about why 13 of our security personnel are currently getting medical evaluations after a confrontation with a lone communications specialist. He stood and moved toward the door. At least now I can give her answers that make sense, assuming I'm authorized to brief her. You are. She'll need to be read into my actual status to understand what happened and why. As they walked through the communications center toward the administrative offices, Sarah was aware of the stares following her. Word of the dining facility incident had clearly spread through the facility's informal communication network, that invisible web of gossip and rumor that operated faster than any official channel. Personnel who'd been working at their stations stopped to watch her pass, their expressions ranging from shock to curiosity to something that looked like respect. At one workstation, a young female petty officer, Sarah thought her name was Collins, caught her eye and gave her a subtle thumbs up when she thought no one else was looking. Sarah acknowledged it with the briefest nod, recognizing a kindred spirit who'd probably faced her own challenges in a male-dominated environment. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes's office was on the second floor of the administration building, with windows overlooking the base's main parade ground. Hayes herself was in her early 40s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a perfect bun and the kind of ramrod-straight posture that suggested either a rigid personality or serious back problems. Her expression as Sarah and Rodriguez entered was professional but distinctly displeased. Master Chief Rodriguez, Petty Officer Martinez. Hayes gestured to the chairs facing her desk. I've just finished reviewing security footage from the dining facility, and I have to say, I've never seen anything quite like what I witnessed. 13 personnel, all trained security specialists, incapacitated in less than 30 seconds by a single individual who, according to her service record, has no combat training whatsoever. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Sarah with laser focus. So, perhaps you can help me understand how that's possible. Because right now, I have only two theories. Either your service record is incomplete to the point of being fraudulent, or I just watched a highly trained combatant assault 13 U.S. military personnel. Neither of those scenarios is acceptable. Rodriguez cleared his throat. Ma'am, if I might, Master Chief, I appreciate that Martinez works in your department, but this has moved beyond a supervisory issue. I'm looking at potential courts-martial for all parties involved, depending on what actually happened and why. Ma'am? Rodriguez tried again. There are factors you're not aware of that significantly change the context of what occurred. Hayes's eyes narrowed. What factors? Rodriguez looked at Sarah, silently asking permission to proceed. She nodded. Ma'am, Petty Officer Martinez's service record is deliberately incomplete because her actual identity and mission here are classified. She's been operating under deep cover, and the confrontation in the dining facility occurred because her cover was compromised by personnel who exceeded their authority in attempting to force her to reveal classified information. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Deep cover. Are you telling me she's intelligence? NCIS. I'm telling you, ma'am, that her actual rank, unit assignment, and mission parameters are classified at a level that requires special authorization for me to brief you. What I can say is that the incident in the dining facility was not an assault, it was self-defense against 13 personnel who attempted to physically detain her after she repeatedly asked them to stand down. Hayes looked from Rodriguez to Sarah, clearly trying to reconcile what she was hearing with what she'd witnessed on the security footage. If what you're saying is true, then I need to be fully briefed. And I need it to come from her, not from you, Master Chief. Sarah had her authorization and had already briefed Rodriguez, so extending that briefing to Hayes was within her parameters. Ma'am, I'll need to verify your security clearance and confirm that briefing you doesn't violate compartmentalization protocols. May I use your secure phone? Hayes gestured to her handset, and Sarah went through the same authentication process she'd completed in Rodriguez's office. This time, Commander Briggs answered immediately. Martinez. Status? Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Executive Officer of this facility, requires briefing on my identity and mission. Requesting authorization and clearance verification. Another pause for database checks. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, 04, TS, SCI clearance current as of last month. Authorization granted for full briefing on your identity and general mission parameters. Same restrictions apply: no tactical procedures or ongoing operations beyond this facility. Understood, sir. When Sarah hung up and turned back to Hayes, she made a deliberate choice about how to proceed. Rather than simply telling her, Sarah retrieved her real military ID and handed it over. Hayes examined it with the same careful attention Rodriguez had shown, her expression shifting from skeptical to surprised to something like comprehension. Lieutenant Martinez, Navy SEALs. She looked up. Your DevGru? Sarah appreciated that Hayes knew enough about special operations to recognize the significance of SEAL Team 6, even though she couldn't confirm that specific assignment. "Ma'am, I've been conducting an undercover evaluation of this facility's training protocols and security procedures. My cover as a communications specialist was designed to allow me to observe normal operations without influencing them through my presence." "How long have you been here?" 7 days, ma'am. The mission was planned for 4 to 6 weeks, but my cover was compromised this morning when Staff Sergeant Drummond and his group conducted their own investigation into my background. They concluded correctly that I wasn't what I appeared to be, and they attempted to force me to reveal my actual purpose. Hayes set Sarah's ID on her desk and sat back in her chair, her tactical mind clearly working through the implications. "They threatened to physically detain you." "Yes, ma'am. After I repeatedly requested that they stand down and allow me to complete my meal, the confrontation was their initiative, not mine. And you responded with what I saw on that video. 13 trained personnel neutralized in under 30 seconds, with what appears to be no significant injury to any of them." "That's correct, ma'am. My training emphasizes controlled responses that end threats without causing unnecessary harm. Everyone who was involved should recover fully within a few days, though their pride may take longer to heal." A slight smile crossed Hayes' face despite the seriousness of the situation. "I imagine so. Master Chief, do you have medical reports yet?" "Preliminary evaluations show bruising, 1 mild concussion, some strained muscles, and a lot of wounded ego. Nobody required anything beyond basic first aid and observation." "Which is remarkable," Hayes said, looking back at Sarah, "given the level of force that was clearly applied. You exercised considerable restraint." "They're American military personnel, ma'am, not enemy combatants. My goal was to end the confrontation, not to punish them." Hayes nodded, her expression approving. "All right, Lieutenant. What happens now with your mission?" "I'm being extracted tonight at 2,200. My assessment will be based on the observations I was able to make over the past week. It will be incomplete, but still useful for evaluating certain aspects of facility operations." "And your report will include details about this incident?" "Yes, ma'am. It will document what happened and the circumstances that led to the confrontation. However, I won't make specific recommendations about disciplinary action that's outside my purview and best left to the appropriate chain of command." Hayes was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about the personnel involved and the consequences they might face. "For what it's worth, Lieutenant, based on what I saw on that footage and what you've told me, you handled an impossible situation with impressive professionalism. Drummond and his group created this mess through poor judgment and failure to follow proper procedures. They'll face appropriate consequences." "Thank you, ma'am. I do have one question, though." Hayes leaned forward. "Why didn't you reveal your identity earlier? If you'd told Drummond who you really were when he first approached you, none of this would have happened." It was a fair question, and Sarah had a clear answer. "Ma'am, revealing my identity would have compromised my mission just as effectively as having my cover blown. The moment people know they're being evaluated by a SEAL, they start behaving differently, usually putting on a show of competence rather than operating normally. My mission required me to observe authentic behavior, which meant maintaining my cover for as long as possible, even if it meant enduring harassment and confrontation." "Yes, ma'am. Within reasonable limits, which I judged hadn't been exceeded until this morning's incident escalated to threatened physical detention." Hayes nodded, accepting the explanation. "All right. Here's what's going to happen from an administrative perspective. I'll be conducting formal interviews with all 13 personnel involved in this incident. Master Chief Rodriguez will document everything from his perspective as your direct supervisor. And you, Lieutenant, will provide a written statement detailing the events from your point of view before your extraction tonight." "Yes, ma'am. One more thing." Hayes' expression became more serious. "Those videos that are circulating, the ones from the dining facility, they're going to attract attention beyond this base. We're already seeing them shared on social media, and given the dramatic nature of what they show, they're likely to go viral. Your command is working to contain them, But you should be prepared for the possibility that your face and your actions are about to become very public. Sarah had been trying not to think about that particular complication. SEALs operated in the shadows by design, their faces and identities carefully protected to allow them to conduct covert operations. Having her image circulating on social media, especially in connection with her demonstrated capabilities, could compromise her usefulness for future missions. Understood, ma'am. My handlers are aware and working the issue. Good. Hayes stood, indicating the meeting was concluded. Thank you for your service, Lieutenant, and for the evaluation you were able to conduct. I hope the next few hours pass smoothly for you. As Sarah and Rodriguez left Hayes' office and walked back toward the communication center, the Master Chief finally voiced something that had clearly been on his mind. You know, I've worked with a lot of SEALs over the years. Impressive people, every one of them. But I've never met a female SEAL before. We're a relatively new phenomenon, Master Chief. The training pipeline only opened to women a few years ago. How many have made it through? I can't discuss specific numbers, but not many. The attrition rate for everyone, male or female, is extremely high. Rodriguez nodded. I believe it. I've seen what candidates go through. He searched for the right word. Brutal. It's designed to be. The job requires people who can function under extreme stress, in dangerous conditions, with lives depending on their competence. The training has to test for that. They walked in silence for a moment before Rodriguez spoke again. Can I ask you something? Off the record? Go ahead. This morning, when you were facing down 13 opponents who outweighed you and thought they had every advantage, were you scared? Sarah considered the question honestly. Scared? No, not scared. Concerned about the mission implications, yes. Aware that the situation could go badly if I miscalculated my responses, definitely. But fear? She shook her head. I've been in situations where death was a real and immediate possibility, where one wrong move would mean the end. 13 guys in a dining facility, none of them actually trying to kill me? That doesn't register as scary anymore. It just registers as a tactical problem that needs to be solved. Rodriguez absorbed this, and Sarah could see him revising his understanding of what people like her people, who operated at the furthest edges of military capability, were actually like. The psychological distance between someone who'd never seen combat and someone who'd made it through SEAL training and multiple operational deployments wasn't just vast. It was almost unbridgeable. Well, Rodriguez said as they reached the communications center, for what it's worth. I'm glad I got to work with you, even if it was only for a week and under false pretenses. You've given me a new appreciation for what the Spec Ops community is capable of. Thank you, Master Chief. And for what it's worth, you run a tight ship here. Your facility was the best maintained and most professionally operated part of this base. That will be in my report. Rodriguez looked genuinely pleased by the compliment. High praise from a SEAL. I'll take it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange kind of surrealism. Sarah returned to her workstation in the communications center, ostensibly to complete her shift, but in reality, there was no point in maintaining her cover anymore. Everyone in the facility knew something extraordinary had happened in the dining facility, and while the full truth about her identity hadn't been officially announced, rumors were spreading with impressive speed. She could see it in how personnel interacted with her, or more accurately, how they tried very hard to look like they weren't paying attention to her, while clearly being hyper-aware of her every movement. Conversations would pause when she walked by, then resume in whispers after she'd passed. People found excuses to walk past her workstation, stealing glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Around 1,500, Master Chief Rodriguez approached her desk with a knowing expression. You've become something of a celebrity. Not the kind of celebrity I was aiming for. Master Chief. No, I imagine not. He handed her a tablet displaying what appeared to be a social media feed. Your handlers might want to see this. The videos from this morning have reached significant circulation. Sarah scrolled through the feed, her stomach sinking as she saw the extent of the problem. Multiple videos from different angles, all showing variations of the same footage. Her confrontation with the 13, the fight itself, and the aftermath. The view counts were already in the hundreds of thousands, with comments ranging from awe to skepticism to detailed tactical analysis from people who clearly had military backgrounds. One comment thread had attracted particular attention. "That's not self-defense training. That's professional-level combatives. Every move is precise, controlled, efficient. She's special operations, guaranteed. Look at how she positions herself, always aware of all threats, using the environment, never overcommitting." That's Krav Maga mixed with something else. Military hand-to-hand. The way she took down that big guy with the pressure point grip at the start? That's SEAL training. I'd bet money on it. The speculation was getting dangerously close to the truth, which meant Sarah's effectiveness for future covert operations was probably compromised. Her face, her fighting style, her capabilities all now documented and distributed to millions of people. It was an intelligence officer's nightmare. "My handlers are working to contain this," Sarah said, handing back the tablet. "But you're right, they need to know how widespread it's become." She excused herself to make another secure call, this time reaching Commander Briggs's deputy, a lieutenant commander named Stevens. "We're aware of the social media situation," Stevens said before Sarah could even finish explaining. "It's not ideal. We've requested takedowns through official channels, but new copies keep appearing faster than we can suppress them. The genie is pretty much out of the bottle at this point." "What does that mean for my operational status?" "It means you're going to be dealing with some restrictions on future deployments until this blows over. You can't operate covertly if your face is recognizable to anyone with internet access. We'll find ways to use you training. Specialized operations where identity isn't an issue, maybe some public-facing work. But your days as an undercover operator are probably finished." Sarah had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. She'd built her career on being able to slip into different roles, to gather intelligence that couldn't be obtained through overt channels. That capability had just been destroyed because 13 guys couldn't handle their egos. "Understood, sir. For what it's worth, Martinez, you handled an impossible situation as well as anyone could have. This isn't your fault. Sometimes covers get blown through bad luck or circumstances beyond your control. This is one of those times." "Yes, sir. Extraction is still confirmed for 2,200. We'll have a full debrief at Dam Neck, and then we'll figure out what your next assignment looks like. In the meantime, you're authorized to reveal your identity to base personnel as needed. No point in continuing to pretend now." After the call, Sarah sat at her workstation and allowed herself a moment of honest emotion. 7 days. She'd lasted 7 days before her carefully constructed cover had been shredded. The mission that was supposed to take 4 to 6 weeks had been cut short, because a group of insecure men had decided she was a threat that needed to be neutralized. "Bad news?" Rodriguez asked quietly, appearing at her side. "My covert operational career is effectively over, Master Chief. Those videos have made my face too recognizable." Rodriguez was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry. I know that's not the answer you wanted." "No. But it's the reality. I'll adapt." Sarah straightened in her chair, pushing the emotion down and focusing on the practical. "Master Chief, I need to write that statement for Lieutenant Commander Hayes before my extraction. Is there somewhere I can work without being constantly observed?" "Use my office. I'll make sure you're not disturbed." Sarah spent the next 2 hours composing a detailed account of the events leading up to and including the dining facility confrontation. She documented every interaction with Drummond's group, every attempt at de-escalation, every decision point where she'd chosen to maintain her cover rather than reveal her identity. The statement was factual, professional, and carefully devoid of emotion, just the kind of after-action report she'd written dozens of times after operational missions. When she finished, she printed 2 copies, one for Hayes and one for her own records. As she was signing them, there was a knock on Rodriguez's office door. "Come in," Sarah called. The door opened to reveal Marcus Drummond, looking considerably worse for wear than he had that morning. His face showed the beginning of bruising along his jawline, and he moved with the stiff carefulness of someone whose muscles had been thoroughly abused. Behind him stood Tyler Harrison and James Rodriguez, both similarly marked by their encounter. Sarah stood. automatically assessing whether this was another confrontation. But Drummond's body language was different now, subdued, almost deferential. He came to attention and saluted, which was the correct protocol for an enlisted person greeting an officer, even if that officer was out of uniform. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said formally. "Permission to speak?" "Sarah," returned the salute. "Granted. Though I'm surprised to see you up and mobile. How are you feeling?" "Like I got into a fight with someone way out of my league," Drummond said with brutal honesty. "Ma'am, we came to apologize. All 13 of us wanted to be here, but the medical staff insisted some of us should stay off our feet for another few hours." "I see." Drummond took a deep breath, clearly having rehearsed what he wanted to say. "Ma'am, I was wrong. About everything. I made assumptions based on your size and appearance. I gathered my team to investigate you instead of following proper channels to address concerns. And this morning, I initiated a confrontation that could have resulted in serious injuries to my people, all because I couldn't accept that I didn't understand what I was looking at." He paused, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. "You tried to de-escalate. Multiple times. You asked us to stand down. You gave us every opportunity to walk away. And when we forced the situation, you defended yourself with a level of skill and restraint that I can only aspire to. I was arrogant, and my arrogance led my team into a situation that could have destroyed all of our careers. It was a good apology, specific, taking full responsibility, acknowledging exactly where he'd gone wrong." Sarah appreciated that he wasn't trying to justify his actions or shift blame. "Staff Sergeant, I accept your apology. For what it's worth, you weren't entirely wrong to be suspicious. I was hiding my true identity and conducting observations that probably looked questionable to anyone paying attention. Where you went wrong was in how you chose to address those concerns." "Yes, ma'am. We should have reported our suspicions to Lieutenant Commander Hayes or Master Chief Rodriguez and let them investigate through proper channels." "Exactly." Sarah gestured to the chairs in Rodriguez's office. "Sit down, all 3 of you. Since you're here, I'd like to use this as a teaching moment, if you're willing." They sat, clearly surprised but attentive. "The military operates on chain of command and established procedures for good reasons," Sarah began. "When you see something suspicious or concerning, there are proper channels for addressing it. You report up, you document your observations, and you let people with the appropriate authority investigate. What you don't do is take matters into your own hands, especially when it involves potential intelligence or security issues." She paused, making sure they were following. "What if I had been a foreign intelligence operative? What if I'd been armed? What if confronting me had blown some larger investigation that you weren't read into? Your decision to force a confrontation could have had catastrophic consequences beyond just your own careers." Drummond nodded slowly. "We didn't think it through. We just saw someone who didn't fit, and we decided we had the right to get answers." "That's ego," Sarah said bluntly. "You're a high-performing team, and that probably means you've gotten used to a certain amount of autonomy and authority. But there's a difference between operational flexibility and thinking the rules don't apply to you." Harrison spoke up for the first time. "Ma'am, if I can ask what you did this morning, that wasn't just self-defense training. That was professional-level combat skills. How long did it take you to get to that level?" Sarah considered how to answer. "Years. Many years of training that started long before I ever attempted SEAL selection. But here's the thing, physical skills are only part of what makes someone effective. Decision-making, discipline, emotional control, understanding when to fight and when to de-escalate. Those are just as important as knowing how to throw a punch." "You tried to de-escalate with us," James Rodriguez said quietly. "We just wouldn't listen. And that's the lesson I hope you take from this. Sometimes, the person who looks like the least threatening opponent is the one you should be most careful about underestimating. But more importantly, sometimes, the person trying to avoid a fight is doing you a favor, and you should be smart enough to recognize it." They sat in silence for a moment, processing. Finally, Drummond spoke again. "Ma'am, can I ask what happens to us now? Lieutenant Commander Hayes interviewed us individually, and she made it clear we're facing potential disciplinary action." "That's not my decision, Staff Sergeant. But I can tell you what will be in my report: that you exercised poor judgment, that you failed to follow proper procedures, and that you initiated a confrontation that could have resulted in serious consequences. But I'll also note that when it became clear you were outmatched, you did eventually recognize it and stand down. And I'll document that you took responsibility for your actions afterward. Will that help us? It will provide context. What actually happens will depend on your chain of command, your previous records, and a lot of factors I'm not involved in. But if you're genuinely willing to learn from this experience and demonstrate better judgment going forward, I suspect you'll be able to recover your careers. Drummond stood, and the others followed his lead. Thank you, ma'am, for the advice, for going easy on us when you could have really hurt us, and for teaching us something we clearly needed to learn. You're welcome, Staff Sergeant. Now, get back to medical and make sure you're fully evaluated. I don't want anyone developing complications because they were too embarrassed to get proper treatment. After they left, Sarah sat back down and finished preparing her statement. The interaction had been more positive than she'd expected. Drummond had shown genuine insight and maturity in his apology, and the others had seemed sincere in their remorse. Maybe they really would learn from this experience. Maybe something good could come from the disaster of her compromised mission. At 1800, Sarah left the communication center for the last time and returned to her quarters to pack. She didn't have much. The carefully curated belongings of her cover identity would be disposed of, and she'd leave with only her real possessions and documents. As she worked, her suite mate appeared in the doorway. "Hey," the aviation electronics technician said. She was a petty officer first class named Ramirez, whom Sarah had barely spoken to during her week at the base. "I heard about what happened this morning." "Everyone's heard about. I'm sure they have. I just wanted to say." Ramirez paused, clearly searching for the right words. "I'm glad you showed those assholes what you're made of." Drummond's group has been strutting around this base for months, like they own it. It's about time someone reminded them that size and swagger aren't the same as actual competence. Sarah looked up from her packing, surprised by the vehemence in Ramirez's voice. "Did they give you trouble?" "Not me specifically, but I've seen how they treat women on this base. The comments, the assumptions, the way they automatically dismiss anyone who doesn't fit their idea of what a warrior looks like. It gets old." Ramirez leaned against the doorframe. "Are you really a SEAL?" "I can't discuss the specifics of my assignment or background." "That's a yes." Ramirez smiled. "I knew there was something different about you. The way you carried yourself, how you were always aware of everything around you. I thought maybe you were intelligence or something, but SEAL makes sense." "What makes you think I'm a SEAL?" "Because I have 3 brothers in the teams, and they move exactly like you do. Controlled, economical, like every action is calculated for maximum efficiency." Ramirez pushed off from the doorframe. "Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks for showing that skill and competence matter more than size or gender. That's a message a lot of people on this base needed to hear." After Ramirez left, Sarah finished packing and made her way to the designated extraction point, a seldom used corner of the base near the waterfront where a boat could approach without attracting attention. She arrived at 2145, 15 minutes early, as was her habit, and settled in to wait. The evening was cool and quiet, with only the sound of waves lapping against the pier and the distant murmur of base activity carrying on the breeze. Sarah took the opportunity to reflect on her 7 days of operation at this facility. Her mission had been cut short, her cover had been blown, and her future operational capabilities had been compromised. By any objective measure, it had been a failure. But she'd also gathered useful information about training protocols, security procedures, and the cultural dynamics that affected facility operations. She'd identified areas where improvements could be made and documented examples of both good and poor leadership. And perhaps most importantly, she'd demonstrated, even if inadvertently, that assumptions about capability based on appearance were often dangerously wrong. At exactly 2200, a rigid, inflatable boat approached the pier with running lights off, its presence announced only by the quiet purr of its electric motor. 2 figures in dark clothing were visible in the craft. Sarah recognized one of them, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a SEAL she'd worked with on a previous deployment. "Martinez?" Morrison called softly as the boat drew alongside the pier. "Ready for extraction?" Ready, Sarah? Confirmed, shouldering her duffel and preparing to board. As she was about to step onto the boat, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Master Chief Rodriguez approaching through the darkness. "Couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," Rodriguez said, coming to attention and rendering a crisp salute. "It's been an honor working with you, Lieutenant, even if most of it was under false pretenses." Sarah returned the salute. "The honor was mine, Master Chief. Take care of your people." "I will." "And Martinez? Whatever mission they send you on next, I hope it goes better than this one." "Can't go much worse," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Fair winds and following seas, Master Chief." "Hooyah, Lieutenant." Sarah boarded the inflatable boat and Morrison gave the signal to push off. As they accelerated away from the pier, she watched the base recede into the darkness behind them, its lights gradually fading until they were just a distant glow on the horizon. "Heard you had an interesting week," Morrison said once they were far enough from shore that conversation wouldn't carry. "That's one way to put it. Took down 13 tangos in under 30 seconds? That's got to be close to a record." "They weren't tangos, Jake. They were misguided U.S. personnel who made bad decisions. Still, 13 on 1 is seriously impressive, even if you were holding back." He glanced at her with a grin. "Command is not happy about the video situation, though. Your face is everywhere." "I'm aware. Silver lining? You're kind of famous now. Mystery woman destroys 13 guys in mess hall brawl." The comment threads are full of speculation about who you are and what special forces unit you're from. "Fame is not what I signed up for, Jake." "No. But maybe it's not all bad. You've become a symbol, you know. Proof that women can not only make it through the pipeline, but excel in the teams. There are a lot of young women out there right now, seeing those videos and thinking, maybe I can do that too." Sarah hadn't thought about it from that angle. She'd been so focused on the operational implications, the blown cover, the compromised mission, the loss of her covert capabilities, that she hadn't considered the broader impact the videos might have. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Though I hope they also notice the part where I tried really hard to avoid the fight in the first place." "Oh, they noticed." The tactical analysis communities are all over that aspect. How you gave multiple warnings, how you created distance, how you tried every de-escalation technique before finally defending yourself. It's actually become a teaching example of proper use of force protocols. The boat continued its journey through the dark water, leaving the base and the chaos of the past week behind. Sarah knew that ahead of her lay debriefings, evaluations, and decisions about her future role in naval special warfare. Her career path had just been forcibly redirected, and she'd need time to adjust to whatever came next. But as she sat in the inflatable boat, speeding through the night toward an uncertain future, Sarah found herself thinking about Petty Officer Ramirez and her comment about showing that skill and competence matter more than size or gender. Maybe Morrison was right. Maybe there was a silver lining to this disaster. After all, she'd spent years proving herself to skeptical instructors, dubious teammates, and anyone else who questioned whether she belonged among the SEALs. If her public demonstration of capability helped even one other woman believe she could do the same, maybe the compromised mission and viral videos weren't entirely a loss. "Hey, Martinez?" Morrison said, interrupting her thoughts. "Yeah? For what it's worth, everyone in the teams is proud of how you handled that situation. You represented us well, even in impossible circumstances." "Thanks, Jake. That means a lot." As the boat carried her away from the disaster of God, her compromised mission, and toward whatever came next, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She'd survived worse than embarrassing videos and blown covers. She'd survived this too. After all, she was a Navy SEAL. Adapting and overcoming was what she did. 3 days had passed since Sarah's extraction from the base, and she'd spent most of that time at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek in Virginia Beach, going through what the military euphemistically called administrative processing, but what really meant endless debriefings, after-action reviews, and discussions about her future operational status. Commander Briggs had been sympathetic but clear. Her face was now too recognizable for covert operations. The videos from the dining facility had gone viral in a way that no amount of official suppression could contain. She'd been identified not by name, thankfully, due to operational security protocols, but her face, her fighting style, and her general profile were now public knowledge. The good news, Briggs had told her during one particularly long debriefing session, is that you're getting requests from half a dozen different commands who want you for training, evaluation, and specialized operations where cover identity isn't a factor. The bad news is that your days of slipping quietly into places unnoticed are over. Sarah had accepted this with the same pragmatic resilience she brought to all setbacks. Adapt and overcome. Find new ways to contribute. Keep moving forward. What she hadn't expected was the phone call on day 4. Martinez, Briggs said, appearing at the door of the temporary office where she'd been working on her final facility assessment report. We have a situation. Lieutenant Commander Hayes from Point Loma is requesting that you return to the base. Sarah looked up from her computer. Return? Why? Apparently there's been a development with the personnel involved in your incident. Hayes says it's important and time-sensitive. She's requesting official authorization for you to appear at a base formation tomorrow morning at 0900. What kind of development? She wouldn't specify over unsecured channels. But she did say it was something you should see in person. Briggs paused. Look, I know going back there is probably the last thing you want to do, but Hayes has been cooperative throughout this whole mess, and she wouldn't make this request without good reason. Sarah closed her laptop and stood. When's the flight? There's a military transport leaving Norfolk at 1800 tonight. You'd arrive at North Island around 2200 local time, overnight at the BOQ, and be at Point Loma by 0830 tomorrow. You'd fly back tomorrow afternoon. Then I guess I'm going back to Point Loma. The flight was long, 5 hours, with a brief refueling stop at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, and Sarah spent most of it trying to figure out what Hayes could possibly want. The most likely scenario was some kind of formal, disciplinary hearing where her presence as a witness would be required, but that wouldn't typically warrant rushing her across the country on less than 24 hours' notice. She arrived at North Island Naval Air Station well after dark, checked into the bachelor officers' quarters, and tried to get some sleep despite the 3-hour time zone difference and the nagging curiosity about what the morning would bring. At 0700, a staff car picked her up and drove her to Point Loma. As they approached the main gate, Sarah noticed something unusual. Far more vehicles than would typically be present at this hour, and a lot of personnel in dress uniforms rather than working uniforms. Whatever was happening this morning, it was clearly significant. Lieutenant Commander Hayes met her at the administration building, also in dress uniform. Her expression was professional but carried a hint of something that might have been satisfaction. Lieutenant Martinez, thank you for coming on short notice. Ma'am, I have to admit, I'm curious about what's so important that it required flying me cross-country. Hayes smiled slightly. You'll see shortly. There's been a development with Staff Sergeant Drummond and his personnel. After your departure, there was a rather intensive investigation into their behavior, not just regarding your incident, but their conduct over the past several months. They walked together toward the main parade ground, where Sarah could see a formation taking shape, several hundred personnel arranging themselves into precise ranks. The investigation revealed a pattern, Hayes continued. Drummond's team had been operating with minimal oversight, and that autonomy had led to several incidents of unprofessional behavior that hadn't been properly addressed. Your incident was the most dramatic, but it wasn't isolated. I see. The commanding officer decided that significant corrective action was needed. Not just for Drummond's team, but for the base as a whole. There were cultural issues, assumptions about capability based on appearance, inadequate accountability for high-performing teams, gaps in leadership, oversight that your presence, however briefly, helped to illuminate. They reached the edge of the parade ground, where a small platform had been erected. Sarah could see Master Chief Rodriguez standing near it, along with several other senior enlisted personnel and officers she didn't recognize. The formation was almost complete now, probably 400 personnel standing at attention in precise ranks. Ma'am, Sarah said quietly, what exactly is about to happen? Hayes's smile widened slightly. Staff Sergeant Drummond requested this formation. He has something he wants to say, and he specifically asked that you be present to hear it. The commanding officer approved the request as part of their corrective action plan. Before Sarah could respond, a voice called out across the parade ground, "Formation, 10 tie-on." 400 pairs of boots snapped together with a sound like thunder. The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting long shadows across the assembled personnel. Sarah remained at the edge of the formation with Hayes, trying to understand what she was witnessing. From a doorway to her left, 13 figures emerged, walking in formation toward the platform. Sarah recognized them immediately. Staff Sergeant Marcus Drummond, leading with Tyler Harrison, James Rodriguez, Kevin Walsh, and the other 9 members of his team following in precise order. They were all in dress uniforms, their ribbons and insignia gleaming in the morning light. They marched to the center of the formation and came to a halt. Drummond stepped forward and mounted the platform, his bearing military perfect despite the visible evidence of their encounter still fading from his face. He came to attention and rendered a salute to the commanding officer, a captain Sarah hadn't met who returned it, and nodded for him to proceed. Drummond turned to face the formation, his voice carrying clearly across the parade ground. "Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Staff Sergeant Marcus Drummond. 2 weeks ago, I led 12 members of my team in what can only be described as one of the poorest decisions of my military career." Sarah felt Hayes glance at her, gauging her reaction. She kept her expression neutral, watching Drummond with professional interest. "We conducted an unauthorized investigation into a fellow service member's background," Drummond continued. "We made assumptions based on physical appearance rather than demonstrated competence. And when that service member repeatedly asked us to stand down and follow proper procedures, we instead chose to confront them in a manner that was both unprofessional and potentially criminal." The formation was absolutely silent, every eye fixed on Drummond. Sarah could see that many of them knew exactly what he was talking about. The videos had circulated widely enough that the incident was common knowledge. What happened next has been documented extensively, both officially and through video footage that's been seen around the world. That service member, who we had dismissed as inadequate based on size and gender, demonstrated capabilities that none of us could match. In approximately 30 seconds, all 13 of us learned a lesson that should have been obvious from the beginning. Never judge someone's worth based on their appearance. Drummond paused, and Sarah saw his hands clench briefly before relaxing, a gesture that suggested genuine emotion beneath his controlled delivery. "But that lesson, as important as it is, isn't the main reason I requested this formation. Over the past 2 weeks, my team and I have been going through intensive counseling, leadership training, and honest evaluation of our behavior. What we discovered is that our failure wasn't just about one incident. It was about a pattern of arrogance, entitlement, and disrespect that had been building over months." He gestured to his team, standing at attention below the platform. "We'd allowed our success as a unit to make us believe we were above the standards that applied to everyone else. We'd developed an us versus them mentality that led us to dismiss or disrespect anyone we perceived as different or lesser. And we'd created an environment where those attitudes were reinforced rather than challenged." Master Chief Rodriguez had moved closer to the platform, Sarah noticed. His expression showed approval of what Drummond was saying. "The person we confronted 2 weeks ago tried multiple times to de-escalate the situation. They showed patience, professionalism, and restraint that we failed to reciprocate. And even when forced to defend themselves, they exercised a level of control and discipline that ensured none of us suffered serious injury, despite the fact that they clearly could have hurt us badly if they'd chosen to." Drummond's voice strengthened as he continued. "I've been authorized to share some information that wasn't public before. The service member we confronted was Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs, conducting a classified evaluation of this facility's training protocols and security procedures." A ripple of reaction went through the formation, murmurs of surprise, a few gasps, the sound of 400 people processing new information simultaneously. "Lieutenant Martinez was here to observe how we operate, how we train, how we treat each other," Drummond said. "And what we showed her, what I specifically showed her, was that even in a professional military environment, bias, arrogance, and poor judgment can override common sense and proper procedure." He paused and looked directly at where Sarah stood with Lieutenant Commander Hayes. "Lieutenant Martinez, would you please join me on this platform?" Sarah glanced at Hayes, who nodded encouragingly. Feeling distinctly uncomfortable with the public attention, Sarah walked across the parade ground toward the platform. The formation remained silent, but she could feel 400 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. She mounted the platform and came to attention next to Drummond, who rendered a salute that she returned. "Lieutenant," Drummond said, his voice formal but carrying genuine emotion. "On behalf of myself and my team, I want to publicly apologize for our actions. We disrespected you, we endangered your mission, and we failed to uphold the standards of conduct that the military expects of us. There is no excuse for our behavior." Sarah maintained her professional bearing, aware that whatever happened next would be witnessed and probably recorded by dozens of people. "Staff Sergeant," she said clearly, "I accept your apology. What happened was unfortunate, but it's also provided an opportunity for growth and learning not just for your team, but for this entire facility." Drummond nodded, then turned back to the formation. Lieutenant Martinez's evaluation of this facility identified several areas where we can improve, but she also noted many strengths. Her report, portions of which have been shared with senior leadership, emphasized that the incident with my team wasn't a failure of the base as a whole, but rather a symptom of specific cultural issues that needed to be addressed. He gestured to Rodriguez, who stepped forward onto the platform. "Master Chief Rodriguez worked directly with Lieutenant Martinez during her time here," Drummond continued. "Master Chief, would you share what you told me about working with her?" Rodriguez came to attention and spoke in his gravelly voice, pitched to carry across the formation. "I've been in the Navy for 23 years. I've worked with personnel from every warfare specialty, every background, every demographic you can imagine. And in all that time, I've learned that the measure of a sailor isn't their size, their gender, or their appearance. It's their competence, their dedication, and their character." He turned to look at Sarah directly. Lieutenant Martinez demonstrated all three in abundance. She performed complex technical work with skill that exceeded most specialists I've supervised. She conducted herself with professionalism, even when subjected to harassment and suspicion. And when forced into an impossible situation, she defended herself while exercising restraint and discipline that ensured no serious injuries occurred. Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "She's a credit to Naval Special Warfare and to the United States Navy. It was an honor having her at this facility, even under the circumstances." The Master Chief rendered a salute, crisp, precise, and held with clear respect. Sarah returned it, feeling an unexpected tightness in her throat. Then something happened that Sarah hadn't anticipated. A figure stepped out from the front rank of the formation, a SEAL that Sarah recognized from her time at Dam Neck, a senior chief named Peterson who must have recently been assigned to Point Loma. He marched forward until he was directly in front of the platform, came to attention, and saluted with the kind of reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients. "Lieutenant Martinez," Peterson said, his voice carrying clearly. "Senior Chief Peterson, SEAL Team 3. I served with your platoon in Syria in 2023. It is an honor to see you again." "Ma'am." Sarah returned his salute, remembering Peterson and the operation he was referring to, a classified mission that had required her team to extract a compromised intelligence asset from behind enemy lines. Peterson had been part of the quick reaction force that provided overwatch. "The honor is mine, Senior Chief. You and your team saved our asses that night." Peterson grinned. "With respect, ma'am, you had the situation well in hand by the time we arrived. We just provided the victory lap." He held his salute for a long moment, and Sarah saw something shift in the formation behind him. Another SEAL stepped forward, a younger petty officer first class she didn't recognize, who also saluted with obvious respect. Then another, and another. Within seconds, every SEAL on the base, there were perhaps 15 of them, had stepped forward and rendered salutes. The visual impact was striking. A line of special operators, all acknowledging one of their own with the kind of respect that came from shared experience and proven capability. But it didn't stop there. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped forward and saluted. His gesture was immediately followed by the other senior enlisted personnel on the platform. Then the senior officers. Then, and this was what made Sarah's throat tighten with genuine emotion, the ordinary sailors and junior personnel throughout the formation began to follow suit. It started as a trickle but quickly became a wave. Hands rising in synchronized salutes, held with precision and respect. The sound built like approaching thunder, 400 people snapping to attention, 400 hands raised in recognition. Sarah stood at the center of it, maintaining her composure with effort. She'd been saluted thousands of times over her career. It was basic military protocol whenever lower ranks encountered officers. But this was different. This wasn't rote protocol or automatic gesture. This was genuine recognition, offered by people who understood or were beginning to understand what she represented. She returned the salute to the formation as a whole, holding it for the prescribed duration before dropping her hand. But the formation didn't lower their salutes immediately. They held them, the gesture extending beyond protocol into something more meaningful. Finally, at a command from the commanding officer, the formation lowered their hands as one. The sound of fabric rustling and arms dropping was like a collective exhale. Drummond, he stepped forward again, his own face showing emotion he wasn't quite managing to conceal. Lieutenant Martinez represents something that every one of us should aspire to. Excellence without arrogance, strength without bullying, confidence without entitlement. She proved that capability isn't determined by size or gender, but by skill, dedication, and heart. He turned to face her directly. "Ma'am, on behalf of my team and myself, we commit to learning from our mistakes, to judging people by their actions rather than their appearance, to following proper procedures even when we think we know better, and to treating every person we serve with, regardless of rank, background, or demographic, with the respect they deserve." Sarah met his eyes and saw genuine transformation there. Whatever counseling and leadership training he'd undergone over the past 2 weeks had apparently been effective. The arrogant man who'd cornered her in the dining facility had been replaced by someone who seemed to genuinely understand the gravity of his mistakes. "Staff Sergeant," she said clearly, "personal growth and professional development are continuous processes. The fact that you recognized your errors and took steps to correct them shows the kind of character the Navy needs in its leaders. I wish you and your team success in your future service." Drummond saluted once more, and Sarah returned it. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone watching, Drummond descended from the platform and took a position of attention directly in front of Sarah. The other 12 members of his team moved to join him, arranging themselves in formation. "Lieutenant Martinez," Drummond said, his voice carrying formality and weight, "my team and I request permission to make a commitment before these witnesses." Permission granted. Drummond spoke clearly, each word deliberate. "We commit to upholding the highest standards of professional conduct. We commit to treating all personnel with respect, regardless of appearance or background. We commit to following proper procedures and respecting the chain of command. And we commit to challenging bias and discrimination whenever we encounter it, in ourselves or in others." The other 12 voices joined his in unison. "This we commit, before these witnesses, on our honor as United States military personnel." It was an unusual gesture, not part of standard military protocol, but clearly something they'd planned as part of their corrective action. Sarah recognized it for what it was, a public accountability mechanism, making their commitment to change a matter of record before their entire command. "Your commitment is witnessed and acknowledged," Sarah said formally. "I expect you to uphold it." "We will, ma'am." The formation remained at attention as Sarah and Hayes walked back toward the administration building. Behind them, Sarah could hear the commanding officer beginning to address the assembled personnel, but she was too focused on processing what had just happened to pay close attention to his words. "That was," Hayes said quietly as they walked, "not what I expected when Drummond first proposed this formation." "You didn't know what he was going to say?" "I knew the general outline. He wanted to make a public apology and commitment to change, but I didn't realize he'd turn it into a full recognition ceremony." Hayes glanced at Sarah. "Those salutes weren't protocol. They were genuine respect from people who understand what you represent." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable being held up as some kind of symbol." "You don't really get a choice in that, Lieutenant. Whether you like it or not, you've become an example proof that women can not only survive SEAL training but excel in operational roles. Those videos from the dining facility have been seen by millions of people, and a significant percentage of them are young women who are now considering military service, because they saw someone like them demonstrate extraordinary capability." They reached the administration building, and Hayes held the door open. The commanding officer would like a word with you before you leave. And there's someone else who wants to meet you, one of our female junior officers who's considering putting in a package for SEAL training. She has some questions about what the pipeline is really like. The commanding officer's meeting was brief and professional. Captain Richard Foster was a career surface warfare officer who'd commanded destroyers before taking his current shore assignment. He thanked Sarah for her service, apologized for the incident that had compromised her mission, and assured her that the corrective actions being implemented at Point Loma would address the systemic issues her evaluation had identified. "Your report was eye-opening in several ways," Foster said, sitting across from Sarah in his spacious office. "Not just because of what happened with Drummond's team, but because of the other observations you made about our security protocols, training effectiveness, and organizational culture. We're implementing recommendations based on your findings. I'm glad the assessment will be useful, sir. Despite the abbreviated time frame, 7 days was enough for you to identify issues that I'd been too close to see," Foster said with rueful honesty. "Sometimes it takes an outside perspective, especially one as trained as yours, to reveal problems that have become normalized through familiarity." He stood and extended his hand. "Thank you, Lieutenant. If you're ever assigned to this area again, I hope you'll come visit us in your actual capacity rather than undercover." After the meeting with Captain Foster, Hayes led Sarah to a small conference room where a young woman in ensign's uniform waited nervously. She stood when they entered, coming to attention and saluting. "At ease," Sarah said, returning the salute. "You wanted to talk about SEAL training?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Ensign Jennifer Corso. I graduated from the Naval Academy last year, and I've been considering putting in a package for Bud S, but..." She hesitated. "But you're not sure if you can make it." Sarah finished for her. "Yes, ma'am. I've seen the statistics. I know the attrition rate is extremely high for everyone, and even higher for women. I've been training hard, but I keep wondering if I'm deluding myself." Sarah gestured for Corso to sit, and they settled around the conference table. Hayes quietly excused herself, leaving them to talk privately. "Tell me about your preparation," Sarah said. "What's your current physical fitness level?" Corso detailed her training regimen: swimming 5 days a week, running 6 days, calisthenics and weight training daily. Her numbers were solid, not elite, but well above the minimum standards required to even attempt Bud S. "Physically, you're in the ballpark," Sarah said honestly. "You're going to need to push harder. Bud S is designed to break people who think they're already in peak condition, but you're not starting from zero." "What about the mental side?" "Everyone says that's the real challenge," Sarah nodded. "They're right. The physical demands are brutal, but the psychological pressure is what eliminates most candidates. You're going to be cold, wet, exhausted, and in pain for weeks on end. You're going to have instructors telling you that you don't belong, that you're wasting everyone's time, that you should quit and make room for someone who can actually handle it." Corso's expression showed apprehension but also determination. "How did you handle that?" "By remembering why I was there. By focusing on the next evolution, the next day, the next hour, not on how much time was left in the program. And by understanding that the instructors aren't trying to break you because they hate you. They're trying to ensure that the people who make it through can be trusted in life or death situations." Sarah leaned forward. "Here's what I wish someone had told me before I started. SEAL training isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being unbreakable mentally. It's about having a purpose that's stronger than the discomfort you're experiencing. And it's about being willing to suffer alongside your teammates without quitting on them." "Did you ever come close to quitting?" "Several times during Hell Week. There were moments when I was so cold and exhausted that quitting seemed like the most rational choice in the world. But I'd made a commitment to myself and to the people who believed I could do it. That commitment mattered more than the temporary suffering." Corso absorbed this silently. "Ma'am, can I ask about being a woman in the teams? What's that been like?" Sarah considered how to answer honestly without being discouraging. "It's challenging in ways that go beyond the physical demands. You're going to be scrutinized more closely than your male peers. You're going to have to prove yourself constantly. And you're going to encounter people who simply don't believe you belong, no matter what you achieve." "Does it get better?" "Yes. Once you've proven your competence in operational situations, once you've demonstrated that you can carry your weight and contribute to mission success, most of that skepticism fades. The teams are ultimately pragmatic. They care about whether you can do the job, not about your demographics. Sarah paused. But I won't lie to you, it requires thick skin and unwavering confidence in your own capabilities. You have to believe you belong, even when others are telling you that you don't. Corso nodded slowly. After seeing those videos from the dining facility, seeing you handle 13 guys like it was nothing, I started thinking maybe it's possible. Maybe if I work hard enough and want it badly enough, I can do it too. That incident wasn't nothing, Sarah corrected gently. It was the result of years of intensive training and operational experience. But you're right about one thing. If you want it badly enough, and you're willing to do the work, it is possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. Will you sponsor my package, ma'am? I know that's asking a lot, but having a female SEAL's endorsement would— Stop, Sarah interrupted, not unkindly. Don't ask me to sponsor your package based on gender. Ask me to sponsor it based on whether you're genuinely committed to becoming a SEAL, whether you understand what you're signing up for, and whether you're willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. Corso straightened. Ma'am, I'm genuinely committed. I understand that Bud S is going to be the hardest thing I've ever attempted, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to succeed, including accepting failure if that's the outcome, but knowing I gave it everything I had. Sarah studied the young woman's face, looking for signs of false bravado or unrealistic expectations. What she saw was determination tempered by realistic awareness of the challenge ahead. All right. Send me your package when you've completed it, along with your most recent fitness test scores and a personal statement about why you want to become a SEAL. I'll review it and provide an honest assessment. If I think you're ready, I'll endorse you. If I think you need more preparation, I'll tell you that too. Thank you, ma'am. That's all I can ask. As Corso left, Sarah reflected on how strange it was to be in the position of mentoring potential candidates. She'd spent so much of her career being the outsider, the one who had to prove herself against skepticism and doubt. Now, apparently, she was supposed to be the established example that others could look to. How did that happen? She wondered. When did I become the person who's supposed to have answers? A knock on the conference room door interrupted her thoughts. Hayes entered, accompanied by Marcus Drummond. Lieutenant, Hayes said. Staff Sergeant Drummond asked if he could speak with you privately before you left. I've cleared it, but you're under no obligation to agree. Sarah looked at Drummond, trying to read his intentions. His body language was respectful, almost deferential, nothing like the aggressive confidence he'd displayed 2 weeks earlier. It's fine, Sarah said. Staff Sergeant, come in. Hayes left, closing the door behind her. Drummond remained standing at attention until Sarah gestured for him to sit. At ease, Staff Sergeant. What did you want to talk about? Drummond sat but maintained his formal posture. Ma'am, I wanted to apologize again, but privately this time. What I said out there in front of the formation, that was the official apology, the one I needed to make for public accountability. But I wanted you to know that I personally understand how badly I screwed up, and how my actions could have had serious consequences beyond just my own career. I appreciate that. I've been going through intensive counseling and leadership training over the past 2 weeks, Drummond continued. One of the exercises was to document every interaction I had with you from your arrival until the confrontation, and then analyze my thought process and decision-making at each point. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and set it on the table. This is that analysis. I identified 17 different points where I should have made better choices. 17 times when I let my ego, my assumptions, or my need to be in control override my better judgment. Sarah glanced at the notebook but didn't pick it up. What did you learn from the exercise? That I'd been operating with a fundamentally flawed understanding of leadership. I thought being a leader meant being the strongest, the most dominant, the one everyone looked to for direction. What I didn't understand was that real leadership means knowing when to step back, when to defer to others with more expertise, and when to admit you don't have all the answers. Drummond's expression showed genuine self-awareness. When you first arrived, I noticed you immediately, not because you stood out, but because you didn't. You moved through the base like you belonged. like you didn't need anyone's permission or validation. That bothered me, though I didn't consciously recognize it at the time. Why did it bother you? Because my confidence was based on being the biggest, strongest, most physically capable person in most situations. Your confidence seemed to come from somewhere else, somewhere internal that had nothing to do with how you compared to others. That made me uncomfortable because it suggested there was a form of strength I didn't possess. Sarah nodded, understanding the psychology he was describing. So you tried to challenge that confidence, to prove to yourself that it was false or unearned. Exactly. And when you didn't react the way I expected, when you refused to be intimidated or defensive, it made me double down. I convinced my team that you were a threat, that we needed to expose you, when really I just couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance of someone who didn't fit my mental models. That's a pretty sophisticated level of self-awareness. Staff Sergeant. It's what 2 weeks of intensive counseling with a very good psychologist gets you, ma'am. Drummond managed a slight smile. But understanding why I did what I did doesn't excuse it. I still made terrible decisions that could have hurt people. Could have, but didn't. You eventually recognized you were outmatched and stood down. That showed some wisdom, even if it came late. Drummond shook his head. With respect, ma'am, that's generous. The truth is, I was terrified, watching you take down my team, people I'd trained with, people whose capabilities I knew in less time than it takes to brew coffee. That was when I realized I'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. He leaned forward slightly. Can I ask you something, ma'am? When you were defending yourself, were you actually trying? Or were you holding back significantly? Sarah considered how to answer honestly without being cruel. I was holding back. My priority was ending the confrontation without causing serious injuries. If I'd been in actual combat, facing real enemy combatants, the outcome would have been very different. Drummond absorbed this soberly. That's what I thought. Which means my team and I were even more outclassed than it appeared. Physical capability isn't the only measure of a person's worth, Staff Sergeant. You and your team have skills and experience that matter. You just made the mistake of thinking those skills made you superior to everyone else. Yes, ma'am. And that's something I'm committed to changing, both in myself and in my team. We've been meeting daily for the past 2 weeks, talking about the culture we created and how we're going to do better going forward. That's good. Personal growth and accountability are signs of strong character. Drummond stood, coming to attention. Ma'am, I know you're heading back to Virginia this afternoon. I just wanted to make sure you understood that what I said in the formation wasn't just words. I genuinely intend to be a better leader, a better teammate, and a better person because of this experience. I believe you, Staff Sergeant. Make sure you follow through. I will, ma'am. And thank you for not seriously hurting us when you easily could have. For handling an impossible situation with professionalism I failed to show. And for giving me and my team a chance to learn from our mistakes, rather than just being destroyed by them. Sarah stood and extended her hand. Drummond shook it with obvious respect. One last thing, Drummond said as he moved toward the door. There are a lot of young sailors on this base, especially young women who saw what you did, and how you handled yourself. You've become a role model for them, whether you intended to or not. That matters more than you probably realize. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, processing everything that had happened that morning. The formation, the salutes, the recognition from her fellow SEALs, the conversations with Ensign Corso and Drummond, it all added up to something she hadn't expected. She'd spent years fighting to prove she belonged, to demonstrate that gender didn't determine capability, to earn her place among the most elite warriors in the military. She'd thought of that fight as personal, something she was doing for herself, and maybe for the handful of other women who'd come through the pipeline with her. But Tyler Tex Harrison had said something during their last conversation that had stuck with her. You've become a symbol. And now Drummond had echoed that sentiment. You've become a role model. Sarah had never wanted to be either of those things. She'd wanted to be a SEAL, full stop. To do the job, serve her country, and be judged on her competence rather than her demographics. But maybe she didn't get to choose. Maybe the visibility that came with those viral videos, as much as it complicated her operational career, also created opportunities to influence how the next generation thought about capability and belonging. Adapt and overcome, she thought. Find new ways to contribute. If she couldn't operate in the shadows anymore, maybe she could operate in the light, training, mentoring, showing others what was possible. It wasn't the career path she'd envisioned, but it might be the one she was meant to walk. 6 months later, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood in front of a classroom full of Bud.S candidates at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, preparing to give a guest lecture on combat tactics and decision-making under pressure. The room held 37 candidates, including 4 women, one of whom was Ensign Jennifer Corso. Sarah's role had evolved significantly since that morning at Point Loma when she'd been publicly recognized before a full formation. After extensive discussions with Naval Special Warfare Command about how best to utilize her capabilities given her now public profile, they'd created a unique position: Special Operations Training and Evaluation Officer. Her responsibilities included developing training curricula, evaluating candidate performance, conducting specialized instruction, and serving as a liaison between Naval Special Warfare and other military branches interested in integrating lessons from SEAL training into their own programs. It wasn't frontline operational work, but it was important work that allowed her to influence the next generation of special operators. "Good morning," Sarah said as the class settled. "I'm Lieutenant Martinez. Some of you may have seen videos of me circulating online a while back." "Yes, that was real." "No, I'm not going to recreate it for your entertainment. And if anyone has questions about it, save them for the end, so we can focus on the actual lesson." A few nervous laughs rippled through the class. Sarah recognized the dynamics at work. Some of these candidates were intimidated by her reputation. Others were skeptical. A few were genuinely curious about learning from her experience. "Today we're going to talk about tactical decision-making in high-pressure situations," Sarah continued, pulling up a presentation on the screen behind her. "Specifically, we're going to examine scenarios where the obvious tactical choice isn't actually the optimal one." She clicked to the first slide, which showed a diagram of a building layout. "You're on a direct action mission. Your team has been tasked with extracting a high-value target from this building. Intelligence suggests the target is on the second floor, but you've encountered unexpected resistance on the ground floor. Your team leader is injured. You're running low on ammunition, and you have approximately 10 minutes before enemy reinforcements arrive. What do you do?" She pointed to a candidate in the front row, a tall, muscular former college football player who reminded her a bit of Tyler Harrison. "You. What's your answer?" The candidate thought for a moment. "Push through to the second floor, extract the target, and exfiltrate before reinforcements arrive." That's the obvious answer. Why is it wrong? Is it wrong? In this scenario, yes. Anyone else want to take a shot at why? Ensign Corso raised her hand. "Ma'am, pushing through with injured personnel and low ammunition means you're likely to take more casualties. The mission priority should shift from extraction to survival and regrouping." "Good start. What else?" Another candidate spoke up. "If intelligence was wrong about the resistance on the ground floor, it might also be wrong about the target location. Committing to the second floor could be walking into an enplacked ambush." "Excellent. Now, we're thinking critically instead of just following the mission plan blindly." Sarah advanced to the next slide. "This is a real scenario from an operation I was part of in 2023. Our team leader was hit, ammunition was running low, and we had to make a decision: commit to the objective or abort and regroup." She walked them through the actual decision process her team had used, emphasizing how they'd evaluated risks, reassessed intelligence, and ultimately chose a tactical withdrawal that allowed them to regroup and complete the mission the following night with better preparation. "The point," Sarah concluded, "is that tactical flexibility and honest assessment of your situation are more important than blind commitment to the original plan. You have to be willing to recognize when circumstances have changed enough that the plan needs to change too." The lecture continued for another hour, with Sarah presenting scenarios and challenging the candidates to think through problems rather than relying on pre-programmed responses. She noticed that the female candidates seemed particularly engaged, perhaps because they saw her as proof that they belonged in this room, or perhaps because they recognized that the kind of critical thinking she was teaching would be essential for their success. After the class, several candidates approached with questions. The former football player was first. "Ma'am, that scenario you described, the one where your team leader was injured. How did you handle the command transition? Was there resistance to you taking charge?" "There wasn't time for resistance. When lives are on the line, competence matters more than rank or demographics. I had the most experience with that type of operation, so I took point. The team followed because they trusted my judgment, and that trust had been earned through previous operations." "How do you earn that trust?" "By being consistently competent, by making sound decisions under set pressure, by putting the mission and the team ahead of your ego, and by being willing to admit when you don't know something and deferring to whoever has the relevant expertise." Ensign Corso waited until the others had finished their questions before approaching. "Ma'am, can I ask how you're adjusting to the training role versus operational deployment?" It was a perceptive question that showed Corso understood the sacrifice involved in Sarah's current position. "Honestly, it was difficult at first. I became a SEAL to operate, not to teach. But I've come to recognize that this role allows me to influence far more operations than I could ever personally participate in. Every candidate who passes through here and applies lessons I've taught them multiplies my impact. That's a healthy perspective. It's the perspective I needed to adopt to stay sane," Sarah said with a slight smile. "How's your preparation going? Your package came through my desk last month, and your numbers were solid." "Thank you, ma'am. I've been pushing hard, especially on swimming and running. I'm going to class up next month." "Good. Remember what we talked about. Mental toughness is going to be the deciding factor, not your physical capabilities. Have a purpose stronger than the temporary discomfort." "Yes, ma'am." "And ma'am, thank you for the endorsement. It meant a lot." After Corso left, Sarah gathered her materials and headed toward her office, which was located in the administrative building overlooking the Bud's training compound. As she walked, she could see candidates going through surf torture, lying in the cold Pacific Ocean, while instructors called cadence. It was one of the signature evolutions of SEAL training, designed to test mental resilience in the face of profound discomfort. She'd been through that evolution herself years ago. She remembered the bone-deep cold, the desperate desire to quit and escape the misery, and the internal conversation that had kept her going. Just one more minute. Just stay one more minute. Those minutes had added up to hours, then days, then weeks. And eventually, she'd rung the bell for graduation instead of the bell for quitting. In her office, Sarah found a package waiting on her desk, a thick envelope with Point Loma's return address. She opened it and found a formal letter from Captain Foster, along with several photographs. "Lieutenant Martinez, I wanted to update you on the changes we've implemented at Point Loma based on recommendations from your evaluation. We've restructured our security oversight protocols, implemented additional leadership training for our advanced teams, and created new accountability mechanisms to prevent the kind of cultural issues your presence helped to illuminate. Additionally, Staff Sergeant Drummond and his team have become some of our strongest advocates for professional conduct and respect across demographic boundaries. They volunteered to participate in orientation sessions for new arrivals, where they share their experience as a cautionary tale about the consequences of poor judgment." The photographs included with this letter showed the dedication ceremony for the Point Loma Leadership Excellence Award, a new recognition we've created to honor personnel who exemplify the highest standards of professionalism and respect. I thought you'd want to know that the first recipient was Master Chief Rodriguez, who was recognized for his consistent demonstration of the values we're working to instill throughout the command. Your brief time at our facility had a lasting impact. Thank you for your service and your example. Very respectfully, Capt. Richard Foster, USN Commanding Officer, Naval Training Center Point Loma. Sarah examined the photographs. One showed Master Chief Rodriguez accepting a plaque from Captain Foster, his weathered face showing pride. Another showed Drummond and his team at what appeared to be a training session with new arrivals, their body language suggesting they were taking their new role seriously. The third photograph made Sarah pause. It showed a group of female sailors, maybe 20 of them, gathered around a bulletin board in what looked like a dormitory common area. The board displayed a printed article about women in special operations, and in the center was a still frame from one of those viral videos, Sarah facing down the 13, her posture calm and ready. Someone had written across the bottom of the printout in neat letters, "This is what's possible." Sarah felt that tightness in her throat again, the one she'd experienced during the salute ceremony 6 months earlier. She'd never wanted to be a symbol or a role model. She'd just wanted to be a SEAL. But maybe being a SEAL meant accepting all the responsibilities that came with the title, including the responsibility to show others what was possible. A knock on her door interrupted her reflection. "Come in." Commander Briggs entered, carrying a folder that Sarah immediately recognized as classified by its distinctive cover sheet. "Martinez, got a minute?" "Of course, sir." Briggs closed the door and activated the security protocols that made her office a temporary skiff. "I have a proposition for you. There's a joint task force forming up mix of SEALs, Rangers, and Air Force Special Tactics for a specialized operation in Southeast Asia. They need someone with your skill set for planning and operational oversight." "What's the timeline?" 6 months of preparation, followed by a 3-month deployment. You'd be embedded with the planning cell initially, then transition to operational command when boots hit ground. Sarah felt a surge of interest. This was real work, operational deployment, the kind of mission she'd joined the SEALs to accomplish. But she also thought about Ensign Corso and the other candidates she was training, about the impact her teaching role was having. "Can I think about it?" Briggs looked surprised. "Most people in your position would jump at the chance to get back to operational work." "I know. And 6 months ago, I would have. But this training role has been more meaningful than I expected. I'm making a difference here. You'd make a difference on that task force too. Probably save lives through solid planning and leadership." "True." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Can you give me 24 hours to decide?" "Sure. Let me know by this time tomorrow." After Briggs left, Sarah sat at her desk and pulled up her calendar. She had 3 more guest lectures scheduled over the next month. A curriculum review meeting with Naval Special Warfare Command, and an evaluation session with candidates who were struggling with the physical demands of training. She also had a video call scheduled with a high school girl from Phoenix who'd reached out through official channels, asking if she could interview a female SEAL for a school project about breaking barriers in male-dominated fields. All of it mattered. All of it contributed to changing perceptions, opening doors, and showing people that capability wasn't determined by gender or appearance. But was it enough? Was she making the right choice by staying in a training role when she could be back in operational command? Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages until she found one from Master Chief Rodriguez, sent a few weeks earlier. "Lieutenant, thought you'd want to know that 3 female sailors from Point Loma have submitted packages for SEAL training. 2 of them cited you specifically as their inspiration. One of them was a junior sailor who witnessed the dining facility incident. She said if someone your size could do what you did, maybe she could handle Bud's. Your impact here continues long after your departure." Rodriguez. Sarah read the message again, then looked at the photograph of the female sailors gathered around the bulletin board with her image pinned to it. "This is what's possible." She picked up her phone and called Commander Briggs. "That was a fast decision," he said when he answered. "I'm going to decline the task force opportunity, sir. I think my impact is greater here, training and mentoring the next generation, but I appreciate being considered." There was a pause. "You're sure?" "This is a career-enhancing opportunity. I'm sure. My career has already taken me places I never expected. Now it's time to help others get there too. Your call, Martinez. The opportunity is there if you change your mind." Sarah hung up and turned to look out her window at the BUD's training compound. Candidates were running in formation toward the obstacle course, their voices carrying the rhythm of a cadence call. Among them, she could see Ensign Corso keeping pace with the others, her smaller frame working twice as hard to maintain position. "Keep going," Sarah thought. "You can do this. You belong here." She turned back to her computer and began preparing her next lecture. This one, on mental resilience and overcoming self-doubt. She knew exactly what she wanted to say, drawing from her own experiences and the lessons she'd learned not just from SEAL training, but from that morning at Point Loma when 13 men had taught her that sometimes the greatest victories came from maintaining dignity and professionalism in impossible situations. 3 years later, Sarah stood in the audience at a BUD's graduation ceremony, watching as a new class of SEALs received their tridents. Among them was now Lieutenant J.G. Jennifer Corso, who'd made it through the entire pipeline on her first attempt, a rare achievement for anyone, regardless of gender. When Corso's name was called and she stepped forward to receive her trident, the applause was thunderous. Sarah clapped along with everyone else, feeling a swell of pride that had nothing to do with her own achievements and everything to do with watching someone she'd mentored succeed. After the ceremony, Corso made her way through the crowd to where Sarah stood. "Ma'am," she said, rendering a crisp salute, "I wanted you to be the first person I thanked. Your endorsement, your advice, and your example got me through the hardest moments." Sarah returned the salute. "You got yourself through, Lieutenant. I just provided some guidance. The strength and determination were all yours." "Still, thank you." Corso paused. "I heard you turned down an operational deployment to stay in the training role. That's a significant sacrifice." "Not really. I'm exactly where I need to be." As Sarah watched Corso rejoin her family, her parents beaming with pride, her younger sister asking rapid-fire questions about BUD's, she reflected on the path her career had taken. She'd never become the SEAL she'd originally envisioned. The viral videos had ended her covert operational career before it really began, but she'd become something else, a teacher, a mentor, a living example that capability transcended demographics. 3 years since that morning at Point Loma, Sarah had helped train hundreds of candidates, mentored dozens of female service members considering special operations careers, and contributed to changing the culture of naval special warfare in small but meaningful ways. And perhaps most importantly, she'd learned that there were many ways to serve, many ways to make a difference, many paths to excellence that didn't look like what she'd originally planned. Someone approached from her left, a familiar voice calling her name. Sarah turned to see Marcus Drummond, now a gunnery sergeant, walking toward her with an extended hand. "Lieutenant Martinez. Fancy seeing you here." "Gunny Drummond. You're looking well." "I'm doing well. Got promoted last year, assigned to advanced training development at Little Creek." He glanced at the new graduates. "Came out here to watch a cousin graduate." "You?" "One of my former students." Sarah gestured toward Corso. "She's going to be an excellent—" Drummond nodded, following her gaze. "Good for her. Takes serious commitment to make it through the pipeline." He paused. "Listen, I never properly thanked you for how you handled everything that happened at Point Loma. You could have destroyed my career and my team's careers. Instead, you gave us a chance to learn and grow. You earned that chance by actually learning and growing. Not everyone does." "Fair point." Drummond smiled. "I'm actually working on a training program now about leadership, accountability, and challenging bias in military culture. I use our incident as a case study with your permission, of course." "You have it. If sharing what happened helps others avoid the same mistakes, that's a positive outcome." "That's what I figured." Drummond extended his hand again. "Take care of yourself, Lieutenant, and thank you, again, for everything." As Drummond walked away, Sarah found herself thinking about the ripple effects of that confrontation 3 years ago. What had seemed like a complete disaster, a blown cover, a compromised mission, viral videos that ended her covert career, had actually been the beginning of something important. She'd influenced training protocols, mentored future operators, changed perceptions about women in special operations, and demonstrated that strength came in many forms. The path hadn't been what she'd planned, but it had been meaningful. Adapt and overcome, she thought, smiling at the SEAL motto that had guided her through so many challenges. Find new ways to contribute. She had. And she would continue to do so, for as long as the Navy needed her. As the graduation ceremony concluded and the new SEALs celebrated with their families, Sarah slipped away quietly. She had a lecture to prepare for tomorrow, a curriculum review meeting in the afternoon, and a video call with a high school student in Montana who wanted to interview her about pursuing military special operations careers. The work continued. The impact grew, and somewhere another young woman would see what was possible and decide to pursue her own path to excellence. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget?